So, good morning, everybody. I guess from the technical team, you can tell me when we're ready to go on the online portion. I don't know where. I'm used to looking over there for that, but I don't. Is it you? Okay, it's just out of my view. That's all. Thank you. So we're all set to go. Okay. Well, then, we have quorum present, and good morning. My name is Mayor John Tory, and I'm the chair of the Executive Committee, and the clerk has confirmed that we do indeed have quorum, and so I will call the second meeting of the Executive Committee for this term to order, and welcome everyone. Today's meeting is being held with the members of Council and City staff participating both by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 1, which is where we are. The clerk staff have connected remote public speakers to the meeting by video conference, and there are public speakers in the room with us today as well. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Executive Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. I would ask for everyone's patience if we have any technical problems along the way, but things have been pretty good in that regard. I shouldn't say that. It'll be the last day that it happens, but it's been pretty good. In fact, better than pretty good throughout the pandemic and now into this new period of time. The City Clerk has provided all agenda materials via the Clerk's meeting portal, and IT staff will be available to participants to help with devices. As part of each agenda item, I'll ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they want to question staff or speak, and I'll then create a speakers list and we'll call on members when it's their turn to speak. When voting on an item or motion, I would ask members to ensure they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, as you know, this is a paperless meeting, but you still have to submit and approve your motions by email, and the staff are available at exc@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So moving on to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, I would ask if there are any declarations of interest today, and if so, please raise your hand, unmute your mic, and we can hear what that might be. Going once, going twice, okay. We now need a motion to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on December the 6th, 2022. So moved by Councillor Deputy Mayor McKelvey. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. All right. We'll go through the agenda, and we'll start with item EX 2.1, re-establishing council advisory bodies for 2022 to 2026 City Council term, and that's being held down for deputations. Next, we have a EX 2.2, 2021 development charge, deferred revenue activity and balances, and I think Councillor Carroll, who's not here yet, but she said to me yesterday she had some questions, so I will hold that down for her because she did indicate that to me yesterday. City of Toronto Environmental, Social and Governance ESG Annual Performance Report. I see there's no deputations, there's no, yes?
Can we just congratulate and thank staff quickly for a great report?
By all means, if you want,
yeah. That's all I wanted to say. Just congratulations to staff. We were the first municipality in North America to do this. It's another great report. I look forward to reading it page by page, and thank you for the leadership in that.
Yeah, and just to further your comment, Deputy Mayor, I think I'm happy that Toronto was the first municipality to do this, and we're doing it in a way that is consistent with private sector and external to government standards. And I just think it is something we should be doing, and we are doing, and I'm proud of it too. And I want to thank all those involved in joining the Deputy Mayor in doing that. So on that note, unless there's anything else to be said, I would see if I'll just call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Of the I think we were just receiving the report. Yes, we are, for information. So thank you, everybody involved. Item EX 2.4, CaféTO 2023 and beyond, is being held for a presentation and for deputants. Item EX 2.5 is the ensuring transparency in the 2022 election, amending the contribution rebate program.
I'll hold that item.
Councillor Pasternak will hold that item. Thank you. Item 2.6, Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors Meetings and Advocacy Days report to Council December 6th to 8th, 2022 is being held for a deputation. Item EX 2.7, Auditor General's 2022 Work Plan Update and Request for Administrative Amendment to City Reserve Fund Accounts. There is
Mayor?
no, I beg pardon?
I had a motion, a referral motion on that,
Okay,
to refer it back to the CFO.
okay.
I've sent it into clerks.
Well, I think if people are content, we would, if it's being referred back
Nobody else wants to
to the
hold it.
CFO, beg your pardon?
If nobody else wants to hold it, I can do a quick referral motion.
Okay, well, if nobody else does want to hold it, I think it's one of those kinds of things that's best to send back if that's the judgment of the budget chief and member of this committee. And you see the motion in front of you. The executive committee refer the item to the chief financial officer and treasurer for consideration and report back to the executive committee prior to the 2024 budget process.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions, comments? Otherwise, I'll just call the question on Councillor Crawford's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. That completes the rundown of the agenda, and there's no new business that I'm aware of. And so what that means is we can go then to back to item EX 2.1, and we have two deputants on that, and I'm happy to hear, we should hear from them now and then move to, I think there are some speakers and a possible motion. So let's see if Miguel, I don't see Miguel, is he here? Oh yeah, there he is. Miguel, well, you're most welcome. And you know the rules better than most. And you have up to 5 minutes, and off you go.
Thank you. So we read the land acknowledgement, and that is wonderful. That is so nice. But it's sad when it comes to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. It's one of those committees that are given proper value. You know, we live in the era of truth and reconciliation. We hear about more children's graves found across this country, and all we get is trauma centers to call, 1-800 numbers. You know, I deeply believe in my heart that the AAC should be considered as one of the top committees of this city hall as we move forward for the establishment of the years 22 to 26 council term. With regards to this report, I'm a bit concerned that we are going to be going in secret or behind doors to discuss the terms of reference. Mr. Mayor, we have these conversations at the AAC since 2021 about incorporating members of the community. I'm talking about grassroots people that work within the community, but they seem to be a rejection by the members who belong to the agencies because they feel that their voices can be a subject matter of liability. And that shouldn't be that way in a country where we want to maintain our freedom of speech. I want to ask if the consultants are aware who are my sister Catherine and Tiffany and myself, who have applied many times. But the problem seems to be that the City Appointments Committee fails to recognize us, fails to give us the proper value, fails each time to give us an opportunity to serve our community. So I'm going to ask you, Mayor Tory, to use your super mayor powers for good use. I'm serious. This is not a joke. But you got to do something to improve the relationships with Indigenous women in this city, because my sister Tiffany deserves a well position in this committee of advisory. Another thing I want to ask is that, you know, TCAC, the shareholders need to be reviewed. Why? Because we only had 3 tenant representatives, and that shouldn't be that way in 2023. We should have at least 6 members and 1 alternate in case someone gets sick. And plus, we should be paying a stipend for our value contribution that we made each and every time we go to the TCAC board. Another thing I want to say, Mr. John Tory, why is there is no Indigenous voices at the Toronto Police Services Board? Why has been ignored the voices of Indigenous people to sit at the board? Because that's what we want, not to be in the menu. We want to be part of the action. We want to contribute with our ideas, with our experiences. We want to help to build this society, this city better. So I'm going to ask you again to use the superpowers, mayors, to allow us to have a representative at the TPS board who happens to be indigenous. And last and not least, I want to ask you to review the mandate of the City Appointments Committee, because for the last 3 times we have met at the Toronto Police Services Board with no finding of a replacement for Jim Hart. It is shameful that the civic appointments have slipped at the wheel again. We need to remind you. You know, I have a bad experience in 2014 when a TCAC director resident was absent for 6 months, and nobody cared to call an alternate member to replace that person so that we can have continuity at the board. So shame on you. So if I'm angry, yes, I am angry, because we need to put you on accountability for these mistakes that you have done for the past years. And I'm also concerned about my safety and my brother Derek Moran, because Councilor Nanciata said something very inappropriate at the TPS board last meeting. And I'm not going to repeat what she said, but it was very shameful what she said. And I'm concerned about if this kind of reaction is going to happen here at City Hall. Today I was treated bad at the screening door again, Mr. Mayor. You know what the answer I get is that there are new staff that are being trained, and that's why they take 5 minutes to screen me. That's shameful. Thank you.
Just ask you a couple of questions, and I'll put this in the form of a question. You would understand, I'm sure, that in selecting the chair of the police board, that we have to make sure, first of all the appointments are filled on the board, because it's the board that actually selects the chair, not the mayor or not the Civic Appointments Committee. And that further to your own comments, we're taking great care with respect to how we fill the vacancy that exists on the police board. So I'm sure you understand that. And if it means we're a month or two in making sure we do it right, I think you would agree that it's better to do it right than to do it in a hurry, simply so that on January the 2nd we could say we had a chair in place. We've had good interim chairs that are chairing the different meetings, and you'd agree we should do it properly as opposed to in a rush?
It is a very complicated answer to give you back to you, because all I'm here is to speak on the absent voices of the indigenous people, Mr. Mayor. It's shameful that since 2010, since I started attending the board, there has been no member from the indigenous communities. So finding Jim Hart, whatever time it takes, go ahead.
I think you'll also understand, I know that the board is composed of 7 members, of which 2 are provincial appointees, 3 have to be members of City Council or me, the mayor, and the other 2 are the others are civic appointments. So it's you know, there are many of these appointments that we don't frankly have much latitude on. So I just point those things out. Not more importantly, but I just also wanted to just ask you. You are aware that there is a review being undertaken by the city staff on the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to look precisely at the questions you were talking about, which include, you know, the representation that's on that committee, the involvement of the agencies. In fact, the city manager and myself have had agreed happily to have a meeting with Francis Sanderson and the task group, because I meet regularly with those agencies, as does the manager, I think. And so, but you're aware this governance review is going on, and that's precisely to look at some, I'll call it dissatisfaction or concern that existed on the part of the Indigenous communities about that committee and how it was made up. And so you're aware of that review.
Yes, I am aware, but they're only consulting former members that sit at the committee instead of consulting us as well, the grassroots activists and members of the community.
We'll ask them to make sure they reach out to you in particular, because you've taken the trouble to come here and comment on this, and we'll ask them to reach out to you and ask you to give them your views, because I think that would be something that would be quite appropriate.
That is satisfying to learn.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions of Miguel? Yes, go ahead, Councillor.
Hi, Miguel. I really admire your commitment. I think I see you a lot. We're like coworkers. And I'm just wondering, what is your passion and commitment that causes you to show up to so many meetings? I mean, you're not just showing up, you're reading the minutes, you're obviously very engaged. What is that vision that you have that compels you to have such a passionate commitment?
Oh, boy. Summarize 13 years of activism in one sentence would take me forever. But the reason why I got involved in city engagement is because I was unfairly terminated from a job at the Toronto Zoo. And that is the bottom line, why I came here, to seek for justice. And because I didn't get the justice, I became the voice of the voiceless. I became the voice of people that were always put down and treated unfairly. And that is why the reason I want to change, make this city a better city for everybody, white, Asian, Black, Indigenous. I hope they answered the question.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Chang. Any further questions of this deputy? Okay, Miguel. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Roney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Miguel, thank you. Just wanted to echo my colleagues' comments. Lily, your advocacy is appreciated and admired. Thank you for your ongoing work. And I just wanted to note, I've been lucky to be a member of the Civic Appointment Committee, and I just wanted to share that it's been an important focus of mine to make sure that we're shortlisting members of the Indigenous community, because your voices absolutely matter, and I think, to your point, are important for us to get to the right kind of city we all want. So thank you for being here today. I just wanted to share that.
Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Warren. Thank you again, Miguel. I think we're done with the questions. Thank you so much. All right, then the next deputant is Tiffany Malley. Is online? Okay, Ms. Malley, are you online there?
Yes.
Okay, well,
Can you hear me?
you're most welcome at the Executive Committee, and you have 5 minutes.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank
Can
you.
hear?
Yep.
Okay. Ani Bojo Anishtakaz, woman who is as beautiful as the fire. I come from Toronto. My family relations are in New Brunswick and Wicklimakong. Miigwech to the Executive Committee for the opportunity to talk. Miigwech to the two new city councilors. I am a very active community member here in Toronto. I sit on the advisory committee for the Mental Health Crisis Response Project. I'm also a board member with the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, and I'm very involved with my community. I take the role as a traditional helper, which is an Oshkobeewis, very seriously. I also have been consistently attending the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee for more than 2 years now. I would like to say miigwech to the Indigenous community members who have, for as long as I can remember, have been advocating to create space for community. I would like to ask the community, the committee to walk with me as we explore the terms of reference. As you might or might not be aware, the terms of reference were very rigid to not include community members to be part of the committee. Multiple seats of the Aboriginal Affairs Committee sat empty for the predominant amount of COVID, and multiple members have advocated to ensure that they can have a space to be spoken to and be heard and respected. The terms of reference were amended within the last term to include that outside community members can be a part of the committee. Unfortunately, I was not aware that there was a recommendation put forth today to ask the executive committee to look at what does the terms of reference look like. I'm just wondering why the community wasn't given any information that the terms of reference were going to be explored again. I would like to bring to the attention of the members to review the special meeting that took place on June 28th, 2021. The special meeting at the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee was just that, to define and to discuss the terms of reference. A motion was passed by one of the members to add 3 community members to the committee to take over the vacant seats, one of which was myself. The special meeting on the 28th will go in history. I'm please encouraging everybody to watch it, all the members, because it truly depicts and illustrates, unfortunately, the unhealthy ways of knowing and being. the things that happen within our community that maybe people don't really want to talk about. And the purpose of why I'm here today is to make sure that members of the community can really have a voice. I'd like to offer my volunteering, I would like to volunteer myself to work with Selena Young to really define what community needs for this terms of reference to include community representation. I really want to make sure that there's opportunities to change and to embrace community members and to ensure that we are really working together. The 2017 Meeting in the Middle report, there was some recommendations to all committee members. One was to attend a powwow. Two was to check out an agency's AGM or to attend an Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. I'm just wondering if all the members of the executive committee, not the new ones, but definitely the older ones, have you, since 2017, checked out a powwow? Have you came to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee? And are you ensuring that the voices of the people are really being heard? Unfortunately, I don't speak on behalf of the entire community. There's 80,000 of us. I can only speak for myself. However, we can acknowledge that TASAC and a lot of Indigenous agencies, they don't speak for us. They should never be speaking for us. And we can't look upon them when the city is making decisions. I'm more than happy to volunteer, as I shared, but I would like for the mayor,
My mic is on. Yeah, we lost her. Just hang on one second.
So sorry.
Oh, there we are. Okay, so just, can you go back?
Yeah, so sorry,
You said something about the mayor, and then you were going to go on from there, and can you pick up where you left off there?
Basically, what I'm asking is, I'm asking for the executive committee to make include that there's feedback from community. That's what I really want to make sure. I need to make sure that the terms of reference can include community members so that as we move forward, that we are able to make sure that our voices are heard.
Thank you very much. When it comes time for speaking, which I think is soon, depending on questions of yourself, I have a motion just to ask the staff to find a way to include the input of people who are not past members, in other words, the community at large. So, because I think there should be that opportunity given, and then we can go from there, get that input and see how that affects the terms of reference. Are there questions of the deputy? Okay. We can then move, now I know Councillor, did you want to speak? Questions of staff, okay, okay. So let's move then to questions of staff. Are there questions of staff? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if staff want to speak to what process might be unfolding in Aboriginal Affairs Committee right now. I understand there's a process. I'm recalling a conversation with Councillor Layton on his way out, that this was an ongoing process, and the gap in community feedback is something that is being looked at right now. Am I right about that?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, I would just say that yes, there is a process underway right now to review the terms of reference for this committee, and in particular to understand questions, concerns, and voices from previous members and the broader community as well, so that we can come forward with something that suits more the need of this committee, and also to learn from this process as well.
So it's fair to say that this possible gap's already been recognized by the outgoing body, and that this very thing, the very thing that we're hearing from Tiffany and from Miguel, they're about to address, is that, have they already undertaken to address that?
Yes, Councillor, that's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Other questions of staff? Because if not, I have one, but are there any other questions of staff? Could I just follow along on, just to make sure I understood correctly? my reading of the documentation was that it was past members that were going to be consulted, and there wasn't actually a provision for the broader community to be consulted. And that's why I was preparing this motion to say that we just find a way to open the opportunity up for people in the broader community to have some input on this. But you just mentioned, the past members and the broader community, and I didn't see that in here. Is that something that is planned, or?
Thank you. Just on that question, I would say that we are looking for ways to actually expand that, but also the terms of reference will come to this committee for broader feedback as well, and deputants can come and provide their advice there as well.
Yeah, you would agree with me, I'm sure, though, it would be more helpful to have some of that input before it comes here, so that the terms of reference that come here can reflect some degree of consultation with the broader Indigenous communities, not just the past members. You'd agree with that?
Yes, we would agree with that, yes.
Okay, so my motion will just ask that you find a way to do that, whatever way you think is best, because I know it's a big community. I have 80,000 people, and it's hard to consult, but I'm sure you can find a way just to make sure that what we get back here is something that reflects not just the views, as valuable as they'll be, of the past members, but also the community at large. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the deputant? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Chang. Yeah, no, we're just finishing with the questions of that deputant, that was what that all was. And if we're okay, then we can move to speakers, and I know that, do you wish to speak then? You're not ready with your motion yet? Okay, and is mine ready?
Yeah, but we want to hold on because she needs time to work. We want to wait
Sorry, what's that again?
we want to hold this item down so that
I'm told that there are discussions going on about Councillor Cheng's motion, so rather than getting into motions, because I think there's a third one from Councillor Ainsley, we'll just hold the entire item down, and we'll come back to it and just go on to the CaféTO, which I think comes next, I believe. Actually, you know what, Councillor Carroll, where did you go? There you are. I held down on your behalf because I thought I heard you say yesterday in a meeting that you wanted to have some questions on item 2.1. The deferred development charges, is that correct? Did I hear you say that or not?
Well, I actually thought a non-member was coming to ask those questions, but I don't see them here, so I'll quickly ask them myself.
This is not the, I'm sorry, I maybe misstated which item. It was the one on development charges.
Yeah.
The ESG
I'll
report.
quickly ask the question myself, so it's on the table, and maybe it'll save us some time in council. On development charges.
Yeah.
The question that's been going around is we're looking at the state up until now in looking at this reserve, certain amount committed, an overall commitment of up to $2 billion. I'm just wondering if staff could quickly paint the picture, or have they not yet quantified it, how that changes under the new regulations. There's lots of change to the community benefit charge. Are we going to see a big change to the collectibles on development charges? Are we going to end up with a shrinking reserve and a different kind of liability than the way this one is recorded?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Councillor, yes to your question in the sense of if Bill 23 proceeds as it's documented right now and how it is interpreted, and there is no resolution with the province, our DCs that we collect on an annual basis would in actual fact decrease. In the budget launch, we did indicate that there were a couple of reserves that would go into the negative in the next year, specifically our housing reserve, and in 2025, our water reserve. So
Water reserve.
they're not the rate reserve, but the DC element.
The DC reserve, right.
And I will just obviously put the caveat in that there is some ongoing discussion with the province that indicates that we are working towards doing an audit of our reserves to help protect the interests of the Bill 22 or the impacts of the Bill 23 legislation.
Right. So they've talked about finding some way of making us whole, but it would be easier to just leave the DC regime as it was, and then they wouldn't be having to cut us a check for $200 million a year.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, I don't disagree with the fact that Bill 23 is going to, if it stands as is, it will have a significant impact on our financial resources. But as I mentioned, we are optimistic that, optimistic with my fingers crossed, that we will come to a resolution about the impacts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was all. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. Councillor Chang, questions?
Through the chair, when will we know if we're going to be made whole or not? Is there a ETA when they announce their budget, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was watching the mayor's physical reaction in the sense of the uncertainty. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we are negotiating the terms of reference and the scope on the audit. How long that will take and the deadlines are still to be determined.
So is there a day where we realize that there is a big hole and we need to amplify that hole for our constituents to know the state that we've been left in? Is there a day where we're like, this is a really bad picture that we're looking at, and we should go public in a bigger way?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, as far as the capital plan for 2023, we are whole. So obviously, as the months of the calendar pass by, there'll be an increased level of concern if there is no resolution.
So September, April, like, is there a day where we say this is not okay, or are we just saying that now and hoping for the best?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think that it's that we're hoping for the best. I think we're strongly advocating and staying committed to a financial audit, which has been what the ministry has committed to.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of staff? Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We all know that at Queen's Park, governments come and go. Is the making of whole a gentleman's agreement, or is it going to be a legally binding agreement where we have security of funding for years to come, or is it just a general understanding with the current government?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, I actually can't comment on that. I've only been privy to the intent of the letter, which I guess is subject to interpretation. But I think the scope of the audit and the commitment that might come from that will be more clear.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of staff? Are there any speakers? If not, I'll say a few words really just because I'm not able to answer questions of staff, but I maybe would just elaborate a bit to help with answers to the questions that were asked about this. And I'll just put the clock on here. First of all, and this is really responsive to your questions, Councillor Chang, the first thing that's going to happen, it is not possible for anybody to set a date on this, but we're going to be watching it carefully. But the first thing that has to happen by agreement, and it's underway now, is to have the audit conducted of the reserve balances, because there was, I call it propaganda because it is propaganda, but there was an argument being advanced by the provincial government that somehow we were sitting on billions of dollars of money that it wasn't required for anything and it was just available and we were choosing not to spend it. It's an argument absolutely without foundation, but we agreed the way to deal with that would be to have an audit. We are presently engaged in negotiating the terms, because one thing that I did negotiate with the province was that the terms of reference of the audit and the choice of the auditor would be joint, so that we would not end up in any way being prejudiced in that regard. And so the negotiations on the terms of reference are underway now, and I think the choice of the auditor will probably happen fairly expeditiously. But the reason you can't state a timetable is because then the audit will take place, and the intention is not that it should take a long time, but it will take however long it takes. And I don't think anybody's going to be acting in bad faith in that regard, because they and we want to get that matter resolved. Then, to go back to Councillor Pasternak's question, I will just tell you that the letter made reference to keeping us whole, but it wasn't defined. And I've had subsequent discussions with the Premier on more than one occasion about that, and I've said, well, the definition of keeping us whole is actually straightforward. Whatever money comes off what we would otherwise have collected by virtue of the new regime is the amount that would be required to keep us whole, so that we end up with the same amount of money that we take in. And I will say that there has been no agreement. He understands that that's how I define it on behalf of the city, and I think that's how all the councillors would define it too, that we're left as if that change in policy didn't take place financially. And so there is no agreement other than what's in that letter to say they'll keep us whole. And certainly an understanding I have with him that we're, after the audit, going to then make sure we have a definition of that I would hope coincides with what I said, which is simply keeping us whole. In that way, anybody else would understand it. But the intention would be to have this in some way codified in some kind of a formal agreement, not some handshake, because as you say, governments come and governments go, and we need to have this codified because the amounts of money involved are so substantial, and what's at stake in terms of the proper capital infrastructure of the city that accompanies development is so much, so important that it needs to be the subject of a formal legal agreement. And I think it's an agreement that will be sought not just by Toronto, but by all cities in Ontario. We're sort of at the tip of the spear leading the charge on this, but I think other municipalities have the same concern. So that I just hope that in my remarks speaking to this matter, that helps to answer those questions that you both asked. And I'm sorry I can't be more definite, but it's just we have to get the audit done first, and I'm very confident the audit will prove that we've done only what is prudent and sensible and in some cases required by law in terms of these reserves, and that they do not represent some huge pool of money we're sitting on just waiting around for some opportunity to dig into it. It's just it's beyond my comprehension anybody would even advance such an argument, and I've told the Premier that. I thought I did not appreciate the Minister making that argument, but if we need to have an audit to prove that, well then that's fine, we'll have the audit. Okay? Then that's all I had to say as speaking. If there's others who wish to speak, I only spoke so I could answer the questions that I think Ms. Crawford was reluctant to answer because nobody really knows the answer, but I just put a little bit of background around it. Yes, Councillor Morley.
I just wondered, Mr. Mayor, if you could help us. Is there a timeline, or at least a loose timeline, around the audit itself? So we have a sense of when that information will be coming back?
No, it's unusual that we get into asking questions of the chair, but...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm new.
But as I said, we'll get the terms of reference done first, the choice of the auditor, and we hope that'll be done very soon. And then the audit will take however long it takes. And I think the contemplation is that we would have it done this spring, like over this winter. It would not stretch into months, but, you know, because that does create the kind of problem Ms. Crawford made reference to if it goes on for months and months and months. And then this year's capital budget, she said, was whole. Right. But, you know, as you get into future years, it's a problem. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the audit will be done relatively expeditiously. We've had some past experience with them. I think, well, you weren't here, but on looking at some other aspects of things that we did here, and they were done pretty quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other speakers on this? Otherwise, I can move then to, I think it was, let me just have a look here. I think all we were doing was, yes, just receiving the report for information. Did you have you wanted to speak? Yes, please.
So I just want to speak to the concept of being made whole. I feel like as a councillor right now, when I negotiate with the many developments that are coming into Willowdale, there is no experience of wholeness in those negotiations. With the 4% that we're limited to, I can't get daycares, I can't get affordable housing. We are creating sleeper communities that are not the complete communities that we envision, where it's walkable, where there's amenities. And so the lack of wholeness is being experienced on the ground, and I'm not sure how this audit process and this promise of finances later on is going to help us build a better city for the future. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other speakers on this matter? Then the question we can be put simply on the motion here coming from the Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer to receive this report for information. Moved by Councillor Carroll. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Now, we can either go back to the first item, or are we still not ready on that? The item on advisory committees?
I think ready for that one.
We are ready?
I think so. Let's go to the next one. We'll go back
All right, well, the next one's going to take the longest of the day, so we can come back. It doesn't matter. It's fine. If we're not ready, we're not ready. Then it does take us then to the CaféTO 2023 and beyond, which is on the agenda, item 2.4. And I think the way we're going to do it is we're going to start off with a brief presentation from Ms. Gray, and then we're going to go from there to our deputations, and then on to a discussion, questions of staff, and the usual. So Barbara, thank you for being here and for all the hard work of your team on this, and over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, so what I have up on my screen is not what you have up on your screen. I have the presentation mode, so I'm not sure if you can fix that on your end.
You say that's different than what you have?
Yeah, well, otherwise you'll be delighted by my speaking notes in advance of me speaking them, which I know
Oh, I see,
is good for
because
everybody. There's nothing to hide there, but sure.
well, it could
let's
just
have
be
at
taken as read. Taken
That's
as read.
absolutely true, yeah.
So you're just saying you just want the full screen taken up with the slide on the left-hand side there, if possible.
Anyway, I'm going to get started and we'll
Well,
get
let's
it
do
res-
that, and
Well,
then
we'll
they
get it
can change
resolved,
that.
shall we? I'll take you back for a moment to the summertime when it wasn't below negative temperatures. And thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our proposed permanent CaféTO program that the staff is recommending. I'm Barbara Gray. I'm the General Manager of Transportation Services, and I've been working collaboratively with Economic Development and Culture and MLS and a number of others, including city planning, on this program over time. So as you probably remember, CaféTO started as a temporary emergency response to the pandemic and resulted in widely enjoyed vibrant activations on our main streets. And this report represents the final step in making the program permanent and sustainable for this year and for future years. Our recommendations are designed to balance the needs and uses on our streets, provide predictability for businesses, and make our main streets attractive and accessible for all Torontonians and visitors, all while being fiscally responsible with costs. Now let's see what I'm going to say next. Isn't it possible for us to fix this? Can we fix this? Hold on, I'm sorry, give me 1 second if you would, it just is, needs to see that. There we go. I don't know why it's doing that. There we go. Okay, great. All right. Now let's go back. Okay, first of all, I'd like to make a brief comment on the impact of CaféTO. So through CaféTO, we learned that there are innovative ways that we can use our public spaces to create vibrancy and enhance our communities. This program has transformed the right-of-way, and it helps us advance many city-building goals. It has also supported hundreds of restaurants during a very challenging time for the hospitality industry, not only by providing more space to spread out during indoor dining restrictions, but also by creating better business-to-city processes. Importantly, we know that the program delivered $203 million in economic benefits to Toronto in 2022, according to a Tabia economic impact study. We feel that now is the time to transition this program into full permanency. Clearly, I should.
There we are.
There you go.
That's what
Clearly,
you
I'm
wanted.
not the person to run the slides, I guess, huh? We've heard from Toronto's restaurant operators that they need consistency and predictability from the city. We believe these changes will provide that predictability which businesses need to plan. Predictability that's needed for hiring staff, for business investment decisions, for ordering food supplies, and for managing other expenses. The consistent application of curb lane infrastructure will also improve safety and mobility and increase the attractiveness of our streets. And we will continue to adopt a client-centric approach to our program operations. The proposed program we are discussing today has been informed by engagement with and input from the public, cafe operators, and other Main Street businesses, the TTC, fire and emergency services, utility companies, cyclists, BIAs, accessibility community members, and others. Their feedback has been integrated into proposed program adjustments. And I think it's also worth noting that the temporary use bylaw that allows for expanded outdoor dining options on private property also will expire this year on December 31st, and city planning is going to present some recommended zoning bylaw amendments by the third quarter of this year for those of you who have a lot of private property cafes in your ward. Okay, on to the next. So together, there are three pillars that we have identified for a balanced permanent CaféTO program, and taken together, they help us achieve our city building goals and sound financial stewardship. The first is recommending all cafe operators to build a temporary accessible platform and fencing for the curb lane cafe. We propose aligning cafe areas with the frontage of a restaurant with options for expansion, and we are proposing a return to fees. So pillar one, requiring accessible platforms. So by Building a removable platform that is level with the sidewalk, this achieves critical accessibility, aesthetic, and safety goals, and was a pre-pandemic curb lane cafe requirement. Requiring platforms is the only way to ensure that all Torontonians will be able to equitably access the program. Platforms are also an existing council-adopted requirement in the cafe bylaw. Platforms are the only way for CaféTO to meet the city's accessibility objectives and ensure all Torontonians can access public space in the right-of-way. Platforms increase safety for cyclists as they are a fixed element in the street and remove the potential for materials to encroach upon the cycling offset. This is especially important on streetcar routes. Platforms also achieve the essential aesthetic upgrades requested by council and the public as they reduce the need to use orange pylons that create a construction zone appearance, and they represent a co-investment in enhancing these spaces. Finally, mandating a platform would minimize impact on enforcement resources. Pillar 2 is around cafe alignment. Feedback received from the restaurant and bar owner operators and other businesses indicated a need to reassess how curb lane cafe space is assigned now that indoor dining capacity has fully returned. As a result, curb lane cafes will be aligned in the first instance with the frontage of the associated restaurant. This approach returns and makes some space more available for other uses like parking, loading, and waste collection. And critically, for cafe operators and their neighbors alike, this is a consistent, objective, predictable, and easy to understand basis for allocating space for cafes. This approach should also reduce the potential for inter-business conflict, which we did see a fair amount of last year. At the same time, we know from the first 3 years of the program that certain streets, especially those with multiple restaurants on them, can create a dining district that has added vibrancy. And that's why we are also proposing the CaféTO Curb Lane Pilot Program, which creates an opportunity for BIAs to design a curb lane closure that fits their local neighborhood character. Through this pilot, BIAs will be able to work with operators to extend patio lengths, add bicycle parking or loading zones, or move waste collection bins. BIAs have deep knowledge about their neighborhoods, and they are well positioned to partner with us to animate our main streets. Once this 2-year pilot is complete, we can look at broadening this opportunity beyond BIAs to all parts of the city. We've already seen strong interest from several BIAs wanting to participate in this program and look forward to partnering with them to make the pilot a success. Third pillar is costs and fees. So in 2022, CaféTO had a program cost across all 3 divisions of about $5.6 million, including staffing, materials, grants, and consultants. For 2023, we project this cost to be about $4.4 million. Returning to the charging of fees for access to the right-of-way is an important pillar to the long-term sustainability of this program and to returning to equality. We don't provide free space in the right-of-way to other businesses. In 2021, Council directed staff to conduct a fee review for all cafe types, and in reviewing the fees, we wanted to align with the underlying fee model that was established and approved by Council in 2019 after a multi-year consultative effort, but updated to reflect the current context of the program. The fee structure we are proposing is based on a partial cost recovery model, acknowledging the city building intent of the program and the value that these cafes provide to the city overall. It should be noted that between 2020 and 2022, the city has provided over $20 million in support to the restaurant industry through fee waivers and program costs. CaféTO has shown the public benefit that repurposing curb lane space can be on the city, and we want businesses to continue to be able to use the curb lane for their patios. But it is also public space, and it is appropriate that businesses pay rent for the exclusive commercial use of that space. However, we do know that businesses continue to struggle from the effects of the pandemic, which is why we are proposing an updated fee structure, which includes significant reductions in curb lane cafe permit fees and a harmonization of all fees for cafes citywide. For 2023, we are proposing an application fee of $865, which is the same cost as the application fee approved in 2019. A citywide cafe permit fee of $44.14 per square meter, the same fee as the outer zone sidewalk cafe fee approved in 2019. A citywide curb lane permit fee of $132.42 per square meter, a fee that is a 50 to 70% reduction compared to the curb lane permit fee approved in 2019. In 2019, a 2-zoned fee structure was approved, which saw higher permit fees for the downtown core. Through this proposal, we are looking to remove the higher cost central zone and set the same fees for all cafes citywide. The projected revenues from these fees represent a 68% cost recovery of the program costs, leaving a gap of $1.4 million. In real terms, these proposed fees mean that an average-sized sidewalk cafe would pay roughly $1,400 a year, while an average curb lane cafe would pay $3,000 a season for their permit. In addition to the platforms, we will be making operational adjustments to address safety and mobility and to balance the street use needs. To account for returning levels of traffic and curbside demand, some excessively permissive previous cafe locations will now be limited. Locations may include accessible parking spaces, passenger bus, school bus, and commercial loading zones, reserved lanes for designated classes of vehicles like bus lanes, and delivery vehicle parking. In order to balance the use of the street, we are proposing to condense the curb lane cafe operating season from May 15th to October 15th. Failing to adjust this will continue to impact spring clean and state of good repair roadworks. Sidewalk cafes can continue to operate year-round through this proposal. Finally, all restaurants should only have one curb lane cafe space. Restaurants with sidewalk flankage cafes will not receive an additional curb lane cafe on a main street. Based on North American experience and feedback received from many businesses and the public, implementing permanent program elements may impact uptake. In some cases, it will right-size individual cafe areas, while others may decline involvement based on the assessment of their 3 years of experience with the existing business model. It may restrict participation for some, depending on the existing streetscape location, and it may contribute to the perspective that cafes are a cause of traffic congestion. However, it's important to keep in mind that all proposed changes are intended to recalibrate the program towards sustainability by providing long-term certainty for operators and their neighbors, respecting taxpayer dollars by lowering operational expenses, and moving towards a partial cost recovery model for the city. We know that restaurants are still going through challenging times and continue to face financial pressures from the long tail of COVID. To support businesses through this transition, a number of supports are being made available through the city and our partners. With federal funding, the CaféTO Property Improvement Program provides up to $7,500 to businesses to help build and install their patios. This funding is only guaranteed through the 2023 season. Tabia is creating free, downloadable deck designs that business operators will be able to use and adjust as they need. The CaféTO BIA grant provides up to $5,000 in funding to BIAs to support their curb lane designs and patio activations. So that is my summary. I thank you for the opportunity to give you an overview of this important program, and we are now available for questions or moving to deputations. Back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I imagine there might be a question or two. Well, thank you, Barbara, for that presentation. And now it is time for questions of staff. And of course, it could be Barbara or any of her team that are here today that worked on this. And so, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, should we perhaps listen to the deputations first so that we can ask questions of what they say?
That's exactly the way I said we were going to do it. And thank you for getting me back on course here. We have 4 deputants to hear from. And the first is John Carew from the Toronto Association of Business Improvement Areas. Welcome, John. You have 5 minutes, and I have a feeling there may be a question or two, so please go ahead.
Perfect. Everything she said.
I wish it was that, except for the following. That's right. I wish it was that easy.
And I hope I avoid the gremlins that Barb experienced. Thank you. Good morning to everybody, and it's actually refreshing to see a bunch of new faces here, and welcome to those at Executive and at Council. I will begin by noting that we shared an independent third-party survey of the 2022 CAFE program. The purpose of said survey is to validate what everybody here knows. The CAFE program is one of the successes that came from the challenges, that is COVID. A $203 million economic impact to the city attributed to this initiative can't be underestimated, nor can it be surpassed by any other program or event that I'm aware of in this city. The return on investment is resounding. Thanks to the vision of your worship, council, and staff, notably led by Barb Gray, Carlton Grant, and Pat Tobin, and the dozens of city staff that processed applications, installed barriers, inspected the program, and helped market it. Collectively, we were able to provide lifelines to our local businesses and communities during the worst of times through unprecedented lockdowns and restrictions. And the report before you rightfully celebrates this creative economic development response and recognizes the need for the continuation of a cafe culture, not only as a recovery tool, but an investment in vibrant communities, tourism, and a strong hospitality industry. We recognize that today the program is a patchwork of creative applications of local bylaws and investments of dollars and other resources from departmental budgets, general revenues, and grants transfer payments from other levels of government. We also recognize that at some point that pay-to-play principle become a reality as we move permanency and a vibrant cafe culture into Toronto. To that end, I submit that the report, however, as written, is too much, too soon. There is no secret in the fact that we have not fully recovered from COVID, especially in the hospitality industry. One only need follow Block TO to see on an almost daily basis the announcement yet of another beloved restaurant, cafe, or a coffee shop closing. The cost of money is increased. The Bank of Canada jumped another 0.25% the other day. Cost of labor, product, supplies continues to increase, and the supply chain plays havoc with any predictability. No wonder margins are slimmer and slimmer, leaving most operators in perilous positions. I'm not going to get into the repayment of the federal loans that many of these people face that's due this year if they want to benefit from the associated grants to that. But once again, likely nothing that you haven't heard before or will hear from other deputies. Our submission is based on the survey results, consulting with member BIAs, restaurants, cafe, coffee shops, along with staff, while fully understanding the need to meet a number of legitimate interests. As CaféTO becomes a permanent program, it is in everyone's best interest that curb lanes be safe, attractive, and fully accessible. Therefore, Tabia supports the requirement for operators to install and maintain curb lane cafes that meet those objectives. As noted, Tabia is working with suppliers and engineers to provide a volume discount to assist operators in obtaining their risers and fencing. It is the other pillar of the report that we are seeking accommodation on. With challenges associated with costs, as we noted earlier, we respectfully submit that the proposed cost associated with the application fees and per meter cost be deferred for this year, and that staff, Tabia, and industry representative be instructed to work collectively over the next 2 quarters to introduce a phased-in approach of appropriate fees starting in the 2024 CaféTO application season. As proposed, the report's recommendations regarding applications fees and specifically the per square meter charges will disadvantage smaller, independent operators that have less financial flexibility and resources than the larger operation. In conclusion, I believe that this is a reasonable approach that will meet the needs and objectives of all involved and advance responsibly Toronto's Complete Street initiatives and its keystone project, CaféTO. I would suggest to this committee and council, in for a penny, in for a pound. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We have some questions for you, and that would start with our visiting Councillor Fletcher, who, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Or use it or lose it. That could be the other phrase. Would you agree with that? Just one of the things that you said, talking about the smaller other ones, it's called CaféTO, and indeed there are some cafes. We think of that as a coffee shop, but there's an awful lot of restaurants that have full meal service and alcohol service, which is a little different than a cafe. Would you agree with that?
I would.
And looking at making sure that, I think you said recognize the smaller businesses, which might be some of those small little cafes, small frontage, donuts, pastries, coffee. Those fees might just be far too much for them, even in the long run. Could you comment on that, please?
Indeed. And I think hence the request to sit down with staff and collaboratively come up with a program that's reflective possibly of all of that. I can't comment to suggest that, non-alcohol serving versus alcohol serving businesses are at a different level with the ability to generate additional revenues, et cetera. But I would suggest as a part of our submission that that would be a responsible approach to discuss at that time the opportunity and look at all the variables that are at play in terms of the cafe culture that is out there.
Yes. Thank you. And I know that you've been consulting and you've heard a lot from BIAs. In fact, 4 of mine have sent letters to this committee today. But what have you heard overall, if you can, top 3 things that you've heard about the proposal in the current form?
Yeah, the dollars, I guess, the too much, too quick. The survey certainly indicated that we undertook that businesses are prepared to pay a fee for the use of city property, assets, et cetera. At that time during the survey, it was never contemplated the need for risers, which have a significant cost. So it's the costs associated with the program, and there will be slippage. I don't think anybody is naive enough to think that all the cafes that came back will come back this year, and that will assist in the parking needs and the delivery space and pickup space needs that are going to be needed on the street. I don't think we are going to get the same volumes that are out there. So BIAs are concerned with a balanced use of the parking lanes that are out there. But the cost continue to be the number one objection that it's a double prong cost that is being presented. The cost is, we've been dealing with suppliers that can put risers in, that can put the fencing in, et cetera. And that is a substantial cost. So having that introduced this year, and then on top of that, introducing the fees, at a time when the industry is challenged, seems a little excessive at the moment. And what we're saying is, look, it's important for all Torontonians to have access to these patios. We recognize the safety and everything that comes with building up more robust, more visually pleasing cafes. But give us the opportunity to do that this year and then phase in a pay and play, as I refer to it, program moving forward. So those continue to be the issues we hear from our BIAs and our operators.
Thank you. And can you just go over again, because you'd sent out the information about the actual financial impact of CaféTO, the kind of extra dollars into the economy, punching pretty far above its weight during the pandemic. And I think you'd probably agree that saved a lot of businesses during this pandemic. Indeed.
There's no secret. The CaféTO has been a lifeline for many businesses. We have testimonials from our survey that indicate that if it wasn't for the program, they would not be here today. And many haven't made it, even though they've had cafes. Do we have some bad actors out there who applied for the program and never implemented, and forcing staff to remove them, et cetera? Absolutely. But I would suggest that if somebody's going to invest as a gateway to being able to put in a cafe in a platform, that they will be more responsible and that these patios will be used with this condition in there. So I think we'll deal with a lot of that. Yeah, I'll take it just because it's free approaches that were out there in the past. $203 million is a significant economic impact. Anybody that deals in this field can't deny that those are dollars, and with all due respect, a $4.5 million investment for the next year to generate those sort of numbers are a small price to pay, in my humble opinion, to generate that sort of economic impact and support local businesses, our neighborhoods, and the city of Toronto collectively.
Thank you. I think I saw Councillor Carroll's hand up next, and then I see Councillor Bradford.
You did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, John. This is a question I'll ask for more detail from staff, but you mentioned the added pressure that in order to access the federal grant program, the Main Street grant program, they would have to also have paid back other loans from the federal government. Is that a condition that you're aware of?
The condition that I'm aware of is that, yes, they have to pay back by the end of this year. There was an extension. It was supposed to be December 3/1 of '22. They've extended that to December 3/1 of '23. The payback component is that loan, let's say $60,000. If it's paid back by the end of this year, they get to keep as a grant $20,000 of that. So it's that specific program, CERB, that is in play. I'm not aware that any other loans or undertakings, or that they have to have their business taxes paid up, or whatever else is out there. I am very familiar with the fact that the CERB, as it was presented, that you have to pay it in order to benefit of the grant portion of it, but you do have to pay it back.
Okay. And you did a lot of surveying. Your presentation has almost as much information as staff's in terms of tracking who did what. Are you aware, I was looking to see if it was in a slide here, are you aware of businesses that may have taken advantage of the Main Street grant already last year?
I will defer to Maya if that's probably a number that you can speak to, but.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I'll be asking staff that then. For some reason, I remembered hearing it somewhere, and I thought maybe it was in your presentation on your survey that gives us a lot of information. Okay. And in terms of the providing, this is my last question, providing a place where BIAs could get that economy of scale by working together and using the design guidelines that Tabia has created. Do you have any early idea of what the uptake would be on that? Or is there a lot of interest there?
Yeah, I have been speaking to a number of suppliers, some of whose are pictured and people have used in the past, etc. What they have shared with me is that they have received umpteen calls about risers, etc. So people in the industry, operators, are reaching out to see what the costs associated. They're doing their research, they're doing their due diligence, as any good business should, in terms of finding out what the associated costs are. So yes, there is definitely an interest, there is definitely outreach in terms of assessing costs, etc. And to accommodate, we are looking at working with engineers to provide some AutoCAD-based drawings that if somebody doesn't want to go the route of a supplier that, is going to bring Uncle Bobo and Uncle Guido over to build the deck on the weekend, that they at least have some design guidelines and drawings that they could adhere to that meet standards. So we are working on that as a package. And I must say, the survey is also in collaboration with economic development. This was not a standalone economic development. We applied for a grant through that office to fulfill this. So while it is tabled as a Tabia survey, economic development was very active in working with us.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks through you, Mr. Mayor. John, thanks for all your hard work on this and advocacy over the past number of years. The grant dollars that have been made available from the city, my understanding is if you had received those dollars in previous years, like i.e. last year, you would not be eligible this year. So I asked that with respect to the platforms. Do you have a sense of the percentage or the amount of businesses who have accessed those dollars out there? Maybe they use them for the quick bricks sort of separation, but not a platform. Do we know how many people have already cashed in on that grant, but not necessarily used it for a platform?
Thank you, Councillor. Again, I would probably defer for a more accurate answer to city staff at Economic Development who administer that program, that grant. I would suggest that it's not many in relationship to the size of some 1,300 potential applicants under this program. I also suspect that there is some limitations of how that money could be used, because it is FedDev money, and I'm sure there are parameters associated with how that could move forward. One of the things we are pursuing with economic development is to see whether that money has to be for a purchase of the equipment, or whether we can negotiate some way with the leasing of the equipment. Because, you know, the outright purchase is one thing, but the cost of CaféTO doesn't stop from, you know, on October 15th, because then it means dismantling, then it means storage in order to bring it all up, etc.
So I wanted to ask you some
That
questions.
purchase price is one thing. The lease, the long-term, the other cost and hindrance into entry into the program is the actual storage, and what do you do with it? So these grants would be ideal if they can expand and include that. Sorry.
No, I wanted to ask about that because we've all had a lot of feedback on the platform component in particular. One of the challenges I've heard is the storage piece. You take a business along Danforth or Bloor, and if you've got a modular kit of parts to build the platforms, even if you can break it down, there's still a sizable piece there with respect to storage. What are you hearing from the business community with respect to storage concerns or requirements? And is there work underway to potentially just use them during the CaféTO season, lease them, I guess, effectively on a season-by-season basis and have someone storing them in a warehouse? Would a BIA take that on? What's the thinking?
Those I see as independent agreements between the suppliers on a 3-5-year lease. That can be introduced. And as I noted, I know economic development is checking with the FedDev folks, who are sort of the source of that $18 million that was moved over as associated with this, to see if we can in fact do that. That would save a lot of headaches and additional costs to the industry if they can, on a predictable basis, know for the next 3 to 5 years that gets installed, meeting the standards that the city has, gets used, gets taken down, and gets stored. And you're absolutely right. Your background, spidey senses are absolutely right. It's modular. These aren't going to be sheets of 4x8 that are going to be dropped in, etc. It's modular, that could be stacked, you know, put into a corner for those that have that opportunity. That's the designs that we're working with, the engineers that we're working with, the suppliers on.
I got time for one more, and it's on that. It's great that Tabby has taken up the charge here to identify multiple suppliers and sort of help stand this up from the industry perspective, because there is now a need for these modular kit of parts platforms that didn't necessarily exist before. My concern is, as we move forward to rolling this out, whenever it is, April or May 24, will we have enough supply on day one from these manufacturers so that the holdup is not, well, you know, I paid for or ordered my platform, but in fact it's not available. We saw that with CaféTO, with the pylons and the Jersey barriers. In earlier years, there was a shortage. So, you know, your conversations that are taking place right now, do you have a sense that these folks are going to be able to come up with platforms for 1,000 businesses or whatever?
I hope it's 1,000, but nonetheless, yes, we have a couple of suppliers that have indicated soon as this has some guidance and gets passed, etc., that they could gear up in anticipation. Many of them have worked with operators out there already, and they know what's out there. They have provided platforms for some already. So this is not a project a nouveau for them. It's a continuation. But yes, ordering materials, etc., is going to happen soon as they have some guidance from us to undertake this. The lease agreements or purchase agreements will be in place, etc. So the two that we're actively working with have indicated to us that, no, they won't be able to turn 1,000 of them around, but between them, they feel confident that they will be able to supply the demand that will become out of this.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Other speakers, other questions of this deputant, rather. Questions at the top? Well, John, thank you very much for all the work that's gone into this, and I think you thank us. We thank you as well because you came here representing a whole bunch of BIAs that could have come on their own, and this is a very efficient and good way to do it, and they trust you to do that for them, and we trust that we're getting good information from you. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what about speakers list? The next two speakers are apparently to be heard together. That's their wish. And that's Tracy McGregor from Restaurants Canada and Kelly Higginson. There they are. And we welcome you here. And we thank you for coming. Now, you have 5 minutes, but normally when two people show up together and they're separately listed, there'll be some latitude given if you take a little longer. And of course, there'll be some questions anyway. So please go ahead and thank you for coming.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here this morning. And I want to thank Tabia as well for all of their work leading up to this. First and foremost, we want to thank the city for making the program permanent and the focus on accessibility and safety. We recognize the effort that the city has put in towards the program. By making this program permanent, the city is recognizing the vitality and energy that CaféTO brings to our Toronto neighborhoods. The program was a lifeline for many restaurants during the pandemic, and while the city and many of the businesses are able to move on finally from this pandemic, it's not the reality for our restaurants. Hundreds of restaurants have closed their doors, taking with them some of the vitality and the contribution they bring to our community. They sponsor sports teams, they support charities, they provide gathering places. 50% of restaurants are operating at a loss or just breaking even. Those that have been able to return to some semblance of profitability are seeing margins of 2 to 3% on average, margins that would be unheard of in most private sector businesses. Our latest Restaurants Outlook survey, conducted in November 2022, showed that Ontario food service operators are lagging well behind their Canadian counterparts, with 54% of food service operators in Ontario indicating their financial performance in 2022 was worse than that of 2021. The Canadian average for food service operators was 36%. While we recognize the city is struggling with rising costs and trying to balance taxpayers' interests, the reality is for many restaurants, these added fees will mean they're unable to participate in the program, one that they were counting on to help them this year. Restaurants incurred mounting debt during the pandemic when they were mandated to close their doors. During that time, debt began to compound as their expenses for property taxes, rent, insurance, utilities, and overhead still had to be paid despite the inability to open their doors to customers. And while there were some subsidies and deferrals to assist with this, the reality is that most had to take on incredible amounts in loans that they will need to be paid back. With people still working from home, tourism numbers still lagging, and consumers feeling the pinch of rising prices, the traffic numbers are still a huge challenge for our restaurants. Add to this the significant increases in rent, insurance, interest rates, energy, and ingredients, along with unprecedented labor shortages that mean they can't operate at capacity, and you have many restaurants still questioning the long-term viability of continued operations. As to the matter at hand, let's return to CaféTO. The proposed changes mean thousands of dollars of new costs to participate in the program, along with being an administrative burden for an industry that is already maxed. As you've heard from the BIAs and submissions, permit fees, application fees, approval fees for drawings, the cost of building or modifying patios to meet new standards, as well as costs for tear down and storage. While there are proposed grants to assist with costs, they still mean thousands of out-of-pocket expenses for restaurants. We're hearing from many restaurants, especially the independent restaurant owners that are the significant numbers in most of our Toronto neighborhoods, that they won't be able to make it work. The return just isn't there for them, and they can't take on any more debt. Most don't have the ability to access this investment up front as they're focused on making payroll and paying suppliers. The report cites revenues to the city, but much of these assumptions are based on similar or increased participation in the program, and this is not what we're hearing from the restaurants. The city did a survey back in November 2022 to restaurants that had participated in the program. Operators were asked how likely the reintroduction of fees would impact their decision to open a curb lane cafe. 60% of those respondents indicated that it would very likely or likely impact their decision. Restaurants Canada put out a quick survey to restaurants when the proposed changes came out in the report last week to get a pulse on participation. Early response shows 50% definitely or probably won't participate, with a further 22% that were unsure. Only 6% indicated they would definitely participate. Restaurants have a lot on their plates. They've made a significant sacrifice during the pandemic to keep our city safe. And while the city's moved on, they are still paying the price. Restaurants need this program to help them on the road to recovery. Now is not the time to bring back fees and the proposed changes to the program. The simplicity and access to the program is what made it such a success for our restaurants and for our city. Residents benefit from more outdoor dining options. It supports local musicians, and it brings vitality to our neighborhoods. These benefits are contingent on continued participation, and the proposed changes will result in a diminished program that isn't accessible for many. Our restaurants need some time to bridge the significant debt they're still carrying, and they're entering into a season when virtually all subsidies and supports have dried up. They didn't budget for these costs. We ask you to reconsider these proposed changes, ideally deferring them for another year or looking to phase them in over time, and we're happy to work with you on that consultation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are you making some separate remarks or just here for questions? No, please go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to put into consideration to this, I just want to remind the room that this time last year, our restaurant community was in lockdown for the 5th time. The impact to the restaurant industry over the last year of trying to recover has been incredible. So we are just starting to see these high inflationary costs impact other industries. But since the day these restaurants tried to open their doors, they have been battling these inflationary costs, whether it comes from trying to scramble to find plexiglass, trying to scramble to find masks, scramble to reopen their doors, try and find staff. So going into the first summer where they might be operating with some level of normalcy, we do ask that all of these pieces be taken into consideration.
Thank you. So now we will see if there's some questions for you from starting with Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much for coming today with that information. I just noted, you said in your survey 60% said they would not participate if the barrier was just too high, and you're telling us this is a little too high for people, and I do appreciate hearing that, reminding that last year it was locked down still in January 2022. So we did have 672 active patios last year, and that would simply mean 402 of them would not be able to participate. So I do appreciate you being here. Mr. Crew talked about the $220 million of local economic impact. Would you agree with me that a lot of it with restaurants is kind of local suppliers? It's fresh vegetables, it's all those kinds of things. There's a big supply chain that would be impacted as well around the $220 million.
Kelly, I don't know if you want to add to this, but yes, it's local supply that they try to use as much as possible. You know, local vineyards, craft breweries. There's a huge supply chain that goes into that, into the restaurants. Not to mention all of the staffing that is also our neighborhoods.
Yes, there were 165 restaurants that said they wanted it because it was free, and then they didn't use it. So it was quite frustrating for city staff, and I'll ask Ms. Gray and her folks about that. But going back and forth, seeing if it's being used, giving someone notice, then finally having to remove them. So having some kind of, I guess I'm just going to say, some kind of what he called pay to play or an entrance fee, that you're really serious about putting that in. Would you not agree that that probably is an important piece?
I think a phased-in approach, we don't disagree that there needs to be some sense of commitment for sure. I do want to remind people, and I was in the operations last year trying to open up 5 restaurants across this country, and I can tell you that last summer was probably the hardest summer of my entire life, trying to staff restaurants on a day-to-day basis. So many of these patios were likely not opening simply because of staffing issues. That was an ongoing issue throughout the season that still hasn't recovered. But we certainly feel that there is a need for some sort of fees, but we're asking for a phased-in approach to that.
Yes, thank you. And just the last one really has to do with the city, and I don't know how familiar you are with our AODA requirements, but we're pretty clear that they have to be met. And we've tried many times to meet them with little ramps and other kinds of things going onto the patios. And Can you just talk a little bit about the AODA and how you could help restaurants understand that if we have a program on city streets, that everybody has to be able to get onto these patios?
Absolutely, and I mean, we do recognize the need for the accessibility and the need for safety, and we can support that. We can support that through our voice with our restaurants. We communicate with them, we have that open conversation with them, we can do training, we can explain the need for these. I think when people understand and you have the communications with them on why these things are there, you can get that message across, and we can look again. When you talk about phased in, those are the things maybe you phase in, and we look at ways to help support them to do that and do it well so that everybody can access them. But it's all of these things coming on at once, the compounding, along with everything else that they're seeing now that's just making these dreams that people who generally start a restaurant, these are in their neighborhoods, these are their dreams, they're leveraging their own funds for these as well. And it's not that they don't want them accessible, we can work with them on that, it's the compounding fees.
So really, you're just asking us to maintain the program, be flexible. You don't want to see 400 restaurants not be part of the program. We're trying to keep as many, our public realm and streets as lively and as wonderful as possible, and have as many people be able to enjoy outdoor patios, particularly.
We are, and we hope to work with you on those solutions.
We do. We want to keep this as accessible to our industry as possible, especially as we go into this really vital summer of recovery. So I can't stress that enough. We don't have subsidies this summer. We are still operating with significant challenges. Pre-pandemic, we had 7% of restaurants making no profit. We're now at 50%. So we still have a long way to go before we can be in a position to put down what we've figured out with the help of Tabia that could be upwards of almost $12,000, even with the grant, towards a patio that may or may not, you may not see that funds come back. It's a huge risk. And as we talked about putting the money up front, then there's the other administrative burden of trying to go through the whole process. And then we look at things like storage and other questions that simply in downtown, as we know, these restaurants are maxed out. There's not a lot of storage. We don't have a lot of storage for our own clothes in our homes, so I don't think they have storage for a large patio plant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Now, are there questions from members of the committee of these deputants, other members of the committee? Okay, well, seeing none again, I'll say thank you so much for being here and for your thoughtful contribution. And we have one more, and that's Billy Dertillis from the Danforth Mosaic BIA. And he's online. Are you there, Billy? There you are. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and you're welcome here at the Executive Committee, and you have 5 minutes, and there may be some questions, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Honorable councillors, your worship, Mayor Tory, and city staff, I'm happy here. I'll make this quick. I think most of my talking points have actually been mentioned, but I'm going to try and take this from the perspective of that small independent operator that has been mentioned a few times. My first point is, in our optimism, we seem to think that the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, but the truth is that, objects in the rearview mirror are larger than they seem, and we aren't out of this pandemic yet. And to give you a little insight, as in my own business, we had our best month ever on record in December. Yet I still had to put money out of my pocket to support to pay my bills, and so that goes to our previous speaker's point that a lot of hospitality businesses are running at a loss right now. When you look at the cost of wages, which I'm paying about 50% more in wages than I was 3 years ago. And you look at inflation, which, the aggregate number of inflation is one thing, but when you kind of parse that apart and you look at what food is compared to other elements, food is really driving it. It's not energy costs anymore. It's not used cars. It really is food that just keeps on raging on, and it's very hard for small operators to keep up and to keep their Is the system working? I'm sorry, I have a very.
Yeah, we can hear you now. What are you hearing? Is there a problem you've got there? We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
No, I'm good, thank you. So the idea of, how can I share something here? Oh, never mind. I've got to change my preferences. I'm not going to do it. $3,400 for me to pay in fees for a few tables in front of the shop is really, looking at it, I don't know if that would be an investment that I would be willing to make. And it goes to say that we're going to be losing a lot of vibrancy on the streets. And I want to ask you guys a question. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but I learned this statistic just the other day. Does anyone know the percentage of businesses across the country, I don't have Toronto stats, that have received a CEBA loan and have already gone out of business? The number is 15%, which I think is alarming. And, just to touch upon that idea that CEBA is going to be, a lot of people are going to be paying back CEBA soon enough. I don't know what the streetscape is going to look like in terms of shuttered businesses and an unwalkable retail streetscape. So I think the last point I just want to leave you on is the idea of this is an investment and can be seen as an investment in complete streets. We make a lot of hay about complete streets, livable and walkable neighborhoods. And I think this investment goes a long way into doing that. If I could share a picture, I'd share what the front of the coffee shop looks like. But it truly adds to the neighborhood. And I think when we're, if you look at overall priorities that City Council is looking at, you're looking at safety, you're looking at emotional health, you're looking at a return to a sense of normalcy. These are all things that the investment in CaféTO does in order to help create a complete street and livable neighborhoods that we can all enjoy. That's all I had to say. I'm happy to answer anyone's questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions of the deputy? Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Brad.
Sorry. Hi, Billy. You were a very big proponent of complete streets from the get-go, were you not? Including the bike lane on the Danforth, to reimagine the whole street and create Destination Danforth.
Correct. That is right.
And I just was quite struck by what you said about having livable neighborhoods. This is kind of the city's investment, just as we did in the bike lane, the permanent separated bike lane on the Danforth, to just enliven the street and enrich it a little bit. From the BIA standpoint, could you just speak about that a little bit more from the Danforth Mosaic BIA?
Well, I mean, the Danforth in particular, we had become a thoroughfare and it was somewhat of a highway. And the idea of slowing people down and getting foot traffic and bike traffic in order for people to, visit our shops. If you looked at Danforth a few generations ago when there was a streetcar, a tram, people would get on, get off. It wasn't just a bedroom community. It was an overall nexus of commerce as well as a community. And that's something that we want to get back. And that's something that bike lanes have helped with, and something that CaféTO and in extension Destination Danforth has also helped us with.
And I think you're arguing that, or letting us know your thoughts, that the cafes actually, once you're going to a cafe, you're also going to be shopping, looking at other shops, quite possibly, in all the BIAs.
Absolutely. I think there's a halo effect on the same, there's a halo effect that CaféTO has had on all retailers. And I would like to push back a bit on this idea that I think has been applied that, CaféTO is somehow unfair to other retailers that don't sell food. I don't think that's the case. I think that all retailers benefit from increased foot traffic and from the opportunity for people walking by to look into their shops.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you for having me.
And it is true to say that back in the day when it was a lonely vigil in support of these bike lanes and other installations, Billy was there. It was a pretty lonely vigil. There's a lot more friends, it seems, now, but nonetheless, that's okay. Councillor Brad Bradford.
Thanks through you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for joining us, Billy. Wanted to pick up on Restaurant Canada's points about the inflationary costs of food. And, you know, for you, it's your entire sort of universe of costs, right? Whether that is CaféTO, patio permits, or food costs, or labor costs, it's all costs for you. On the cafe side and restaurants in particular, have you seen an escalation in the inflationary driven costs on food?
Yeah, 100%. I perhaps didn't do my due diligence and had raised my prices a few months ago and looked at costing and realized that I was making no money. You know, I think all operators share the fear of raising our prices too much and driving customers away. And we're all looking for new efficiencies, better processes in order to perhaps pass on some savings on to our customers. But that said, you know, every 2 months, the last time I did a sort of analysis of our costing was in November. And I did it again in this month in January. And some things have gone up 20-30% again. So it really is, it's an issue.
So in the restaurant sector in particular, and the inflationary impacts on food costs, that would primarily be the segment that, of course, is taking part in the CaféTO program, restaurants, bars, cafes, and yet that's the segment of industry right now that's being hit particularly hard with rising inflation costs. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I do agree.
I'm familiar with Red Rocket, of course. You have, what, 3 or 4 tables out there when you've got the CaféTO program going on?
I had 6 tables because I had 2 storefronts. So I was taking up two spaces.
Okay, I have questions for staff on that, actually, about the multiple storefronts. But what I wanted to ask is, as a small business owner, you are going through the calculation right now, and you are trying to determine the $3,000 plus for the fee, plus the $14,000 or $15,000 cost for the platform. I guess it's, you know, simple math. You're dividing that over tables and figuring out, you know, is that worth it for you? The thing that's unique about a coffee shop perhaps is, I don't know what the turnover rate is like on those tables out front, but a lot of people walk up to your store, they get a coffee to go, they might sit inside, you just did a renovation, or they might just leave altogether. Have you given any thought, and I don't know how you track this, and I don't know if you have, but the CaféTO program in terms of your ability to sell more coffee because people are sitting and posting up at those tables, or would those coffees be sold anyways? Like, that's effectively the evaluation that you're doing right now. Is it worth spending the money?
No,
Do I get an ROI on that, or would I sell those coffees anyways?
That is a really good question, and I don't know the answer. You know, the business, my business is a takeout business. Even if you're staying indoors or even if you're staying on the patio, it's the same operation. You're walking up to a counter, taking something away. So we don't have the ability to measure whether or not what we're selling is being consumed at a table, whether that be indoors or outdoors. What I do think, though, is that there is 100% a halo effect, and that, you know, people walking by and seeing this great streetscape, that encourages them to come in and buy a coffee. I'm not able to put a number on that. I can't quantify what that halo effect is. And because of that, I don't know what the negative halo effect would be if we take that away.
So you like the program, it looks great, it adds to Danforth, but, you know, in terms of if you're looking down the barrel at 15 grand or whatever in costs, you got to kind of think carefully about that. Thanks for deputing today. Thanks for your deputation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Councillor Bradford. Other questions of this deputant? Okay, well, Billy, thank you again so much for all your support over time and for your advice today. Appreciate that all very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the shop before too long. Okay.
All right.
That brings to an end the deputations for today, and that would move us then to questions of staff. And I guess we would start with you, Councillor Fletcher, if you have some.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I was quite struck by the fact that there was 165 restaurants that said they want a patio and then didn't use it. So out of 10, the frustration level for that must have been about a 10 for you and for MLS, I would think.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fletcher, yes, it was actually 106, so it
Oh,
was
I
about
see.
12%.
Okay.
And some of those, actually, some of those operators called us and asked us to remove their setups because they wanted to take advantage of curbside parking, and many others were enforced, because as you remember, we had rules last year
Yes.
that if you didn't set up for a certain number of meal services, we would remove them. So
But-
yes, it was frustrating.
Those were the ones that you actually visited. There were some that perhaps weren't called in and visited that were also empty. So there's a significant number that are significant, but because it was free, people said, that's great, I'll try that. But they didn't, I don't think they really realized the cost of the setup and the cost, the impact, if it really wasn't generating income for them. Would I be right to say that?
Through the mayor, I think that's correct, yes.
And I did notice that MLS had to go out a number, that was quite costly, the number of people you had to send out, because you couldn't just take it away. You had to check and make sure that they weren't there, because that would have been a bad headline if it was a well-used patio and had been removed, I think, right?
So thank you for the question, and through the mayor, that is correct. So we would work both MLS officers or transportation bylaw officers to address this. What's important to note is the complaints and the frustration that warranted those investigations came from the neighboring businesses and from the public that saw empty patios that weren't being used and that could have been used for their businesses, the dry cleaner, the bank, the...
Yes, for the parking, that's right. So having a fee is probably a wise idea. You have heard from a lot of people that it may kind of kill the program. If Restaurant Canada is right, 60% of those that were there might not be part. That's 400 patios. That would be kind of a, I believe it would be a diminishment of what I think Mr. Detellis was really clear on, a major public realm enhancement as well for many of our streets. Would you agree with that? That there's also a public realm component here?
Through the mayor, absolutely. And I think we recognize that in our proposal as well, that they're, trying to achieve some balance, that there is a definite contribution to the public's overall experience of the right-of-way when CaféTO is in place. It's very vibrant. People are out. I liked the deputy who talked about the halo effect. I think all of that's quite accurate. To your other point, Councillor Fletcher, I do think that but trying to achieve that balance, the restaurant operators who set up for their most sort of popular meal services, if they're closed on a Monday or Tuesday, we certainly don't expect them to have an active cafe. So I think we tried to be reasonable in that approach and have a certain number of meal services required as minimum, and I think that's what our proposal is here, as well as trying to come up with a balance that takes all those pieces into consideration.
Now, just for economic development, Tabia has come up with this number, which is, I think, quite significant, the $220 million impact. Those are for the cafes that didn't have to be removed or actually were working. Do you think that's a significant number? And then asking about the supply chain, because it's a little different than importing things from a foreign country to sell. There's a lot of local supplies and suppliers that are associated with the restaurant business.
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, we would agree that the impact of this program economically and on local businesses and on the local supply chain is very significant and is positive.
Then for those businesses that don't have, that are in plazas, and it was such a popular program that many councillors who didn't have main streets then asked to have them in malls and other locations. That seems to be also just good for business in those locations as well, that aren't right in a BIA zone.
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. The CaféTO program consists of access to public space on sidewalks and in curb lane cafes. And the third component of the program, perhaps less well recognized, is the ability to have cafes on private property as well. And as mentioned in the presentation, the current temporary use zoning bylaw allows that through this coming season as well. And then planning will come back and present to council its advice around extending that permission further.
A fee for that?
Through the chair, no, there's no fee for that.
There's no fee for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the staff team for all their work on this. I know it's hard to kind of formalize a program that's been underway for a couple of years and bring it to ground. So a couple questions, and I think we all have an understanding of some of the things that need to be addressed, and I appreciate the deputants coming out, and I know we're going to work on that. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the limits to the frontage. And I understand we're moving away from allowing businesses to expand their cafes beyond their frontage via letter, as we heard from Billy at Red Rocket today, but there's others. Why is that decision being taken, and was that a problem that needed to be fixed, or?
So through the chair, thank you, Council, for the question. So as indicated in the overview presentation, this new framework that we're recommending to Council is designed in part to provide predictability, consistency to the business operators and to other businesses in our communities so that they understand where these cafe locations are most likely to take place. And as my colleague indicated in the presentation, in the first instance, we want to align the cafe curb lane location with the frontage of the business, but also provide an opportunity through the proposed pilot program for businesses to work with their BIA to develop a customized approach that may allow, in some instances, that business to extend beyond its frontage.
What was the problem with the letter?
Through the mayor, Councillor Bradford, the problem with the letter, and I know you probably experienced some of this as well in some of your BIAs, is that curb space is quite a valuable asset to all businesses, not just to restaurants. And so whether it's parking or loading or a physical therapist who needs drop-off for patients who have mobility challenges, relying on the adjacent businesses to provide permission to right-of-way that they benefit from, but they don't, it's the city's responsibility to oversee that, was quite challenging. When we did it previously, it was difficult. And so we want to really work through the BIAs, which know their organizations best, to be able to find those that are the most who really would like to benefit from that kind of a dining district concept. And there are a number of them through the program over the last 3 years that have been much more engaged in trying to make that happen. So that's why we propose it as a pilot, but the permission letters were really difficult for the businesses to navigate and didn't necessarily result in the outcome that I think we had hoped they would.
Do you have a sense of, what did you say, 1,100, 1,200 patios across the city? Do you have a sense of how many actually use the letter program to get additional patio space? Could you get me that number for council?
I don't think any did. Is that right?
What?
It was not a requirement. The permission letter was not a requirement.
Oh, well, they were just asking their neighbors, and it wasn't in a letter, it was informal.
Sorry, Councillor. In the first year, the permission letter was a requirement.
Okay.
Following years, in 21 and 22, we eliminated that requirement because of the challenges of implementation with it, and worked instead directly with the BIAs to enable those sort of streetscape plans where restaurants could expand beyond their frontage.
So my question now with the BIAs is the streets that don't have a BIA, St. Clair, Kingston, I'm thinking in my part of town, but took advantage of the CaféTO program, Kingston Road in particular, quite extensively. Some of the patios are quite a bit bigger than one storefront. What's the path forward for those businesses?
So I think we have a little bit more work to do to come up with a solution. Last year, we had a solution where we allowed those to expand somewhat beyond their frontage. And I think that was a reasonable approach. We understand that on the go forward, I mean, last year we got a lot of feedback from businesses who are not restaurants about concerns they had in using that frontage for cafes. So we're trying again to strike some balance, and I think that we're happy to look at an option for businesses outside of BIAs.
Okay, and that's something that we could kind of turn around between now and council? Okay.
Yes, we can.
And then the last question was on the grants, and I'd asked John Carew a question about the percentage of folks who had taken advantage of grants. Do we have a sense of where those dollars were allocated, if they were into platforms or if they were into other things? So the grant dollars that are still available, the folks who are likely to apply for them, and if they're available to help supplement the cost of the platforms.
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. So to date, we've issued through the CaféTO Property Improvement Program grant 65 grants. Of those, I believe 19 went to businesses that installed the platform. You had an earlier question about could a business that accessed the grant previously get it again? The answer probably is not, unless they haven't used the full amount. So under our contribution agreement with the federal government that's funding this program, any one business can only receive up to the maximum of $7,500. So if they didn't use that full amount previously, they could come back to us. But otherwise, if they've already maxed out their $7,500 contribution, they wouldn't be able to get it again.
I'm over time, but I want to clarify what you just said. It was 65, we sent out 65 grants, of which 19 you think were used for platforms.
That's my understanding. Okay. Under the program, there's other eligible property improvement expenses that can also be used for.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bradford. Deputy Mayor McKelvey, questions?
Thank you. What will the net cost to the city be for the program? Is it 3.4 million?
So thanks for the question. It is 4.3, almost $4.4 million in 2023.
Okay. And this is a question for economic development. Council had given previous direction to look into corporate sponsorship. Has any work been done on that?
Through the mayor, so we have looked at corporate sponsorship. What we found in terms of corporate sponsorship offsetting the cost of the program, when businesses contacted directly with corporate sponsors to provide signage or umbrellas or what have you, that those revenues did not come back to the city. They were benefit to the business. There's also restrictions in our sign code for having permanent corporate branding on permanent fixtures in the right-of-way. That's why they're on umbrellas, and you can have them in movable things like bike share bikes, etc. And I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add.
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I would just add as well that the lack of having a permanent program design would make it more challenging for the city to solicit a sponsorship approach from potential sponsors as well. So the program's only been going year to year until this point in time, and that becomes it more challenging to kind of define what the value proposition would be. But there are requirements, as my colleague was saying, vis-a-vis our existing sponsorship arrangement with Astral Bell Media that would need to be worked through.
So now that this becomes a permanent program, I mean, those are hurdles that in theory could be overcome. So does economic development need further direction to continue to look into this? Or can they just take it as the previous request from council?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I don't know that we need new direction from council. Should council choose to make the program permanent, we can begin to look into those matters.
Okay, and I will ask the same question again next year. Can you outline what supports there are for restaurants in other areas? We know that CaféTO, just the nature of the restaurants throughout Etobicoke, Scarborough, not really existing on a right-of-way or on a street. What programs and supports are in place for restaurants across the city in recognizing that CaféTO isn't something really for them?
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. So there are some programs that are available and provided by the city that benefit businesses writ large. The new small business property tax subclass is a significant new program benefiting 29,000 businesses in our city. There are other programs such as the Digital Main Street program that the city sponsors to the tune of about $550,000 per year. Through that program, those Digital Main Street Squad members are engaging with small business operators, including restaurant operators in different parts of the city, and in particular in areas outside of the core that might not benefit from some of the other programs such as the CaféTO program, which is really a program that allows the city to support businesses through the provision of public space.
And are you looking at, do you have any sort of metrics that are showing where uptake is on that? And are you starting to show that, is there anything showing trends that uptake in suburbs is growing, or that there is uptake at all in the suburbs for any of those programs?
Sorry, so I have data for the programs that Economic Development and Culture is responsible for. So for example, we have a starter company program for youth, young entrepreneurs, and we know that the take-up of that program, approximately 42% of the recipients of grants, that $3,000 grant for the starter company program came from Scarborough. So we'd really have to go kind of program by program and look at the data to provide information about which city supports are benefiting different parts of the city in different ways. And in many cases, it will depend on the nature of the program. How is the city providing that support? Is it space? Is it a direct grant? Is it information? And what have you? And that's something that we can certainly report back on to council at a different time as appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of staff? Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been touched on before, but I wanted to really drill down to the situations in which restaurants are establishing patios on private property in, let's say, a small strip mall, which is quite common in the inner suburbs. Under this program, I can't seem to detect any funding available, whether they are, even if they are on a BIA zone. Is that correct, or is this only applicable to those in sort of the public right-of-way?
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. The CaféTO Property Improvement Program grant is available to business operators, either whether they are part of a BIA or whether they are not. So that program is available to businesses irrespective. In terms of the provision of permits for either sidewalks or for curb lane cafes, those are coming out into the public domain, and obviously many restaurants that are part of a strip mall in a more suburban area of our city, they're not fronting onto the public right-of-way in the same way.
So when a restaurant in those situations wants to set up a patio, would they, and they're a tenant in that location, would they need the permissions of the property owner, or could they establish it by right?
Through the chair, so Kyle Kinnick is here from city planning, because that permitting process falls under the zoning bylaw. So maybe he has some insights on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are zoning permissions in place that would allow those patios to exist on that parking lot, in your example, on the private property. Any tenant of that property, I assume, would need permission from their landlord in order to install that patio.
So in one case in particular, a restaurant wanted to establish a patio on private property in a strip plaza. The property owner said, "Oh, no, you don't," and that was the end of the conversation. The patio had to go. It was disassembled, and that was that. Is that a normal course of action? Does the restaurant have any rights under this plan, under this program, to establish the patio on private property with?
Yeah, I understand the question. The zoning bylaw grants land use permissions, but there's nothing in zoning that can obligate a landlord to permit their tenant to do something. That ends up really being a private matter between the landlord and the commercial tenant.
So it's simply a civil matter. The landlord does not have the right to say no, and the restaurant owner doesn't have the right to say yes. They have to sort of work it out themselves. And there's nothing in this program that supports the restaurant owner in those situations. I mean, there's
Not in that situation, not that I'm aware of, or that comes through any planning regulations.
And just to make sure I understand it, if there's an agreement by the tenant and the landlord to have the patio there, and it is not in a BIA, are there funds under this program, or they have to go to the secondary business support program, such as the virtual cafe and things like that?
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. As my colleague from City Planning has indicated, there's nothing that the city can do in terms of influencing that relationship between a private landlord and their tenant on private property. The CaféTO Property Improvement Grant Program can be accessed by those restaurants in that situation. But if their landlord is saying you can't have a patio on the private property in front of your establishment, there's not much the city can do.
Okay. On a separate issue, on page 27, there's on the amplified live music provisions, there's a mention that there were 7 charges laid in 2022. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with those charges and whether there were fines or penalties, or whether they ever made it to court, or were they settled out of court? What happens with these violations?
So thanks for that question, and I don't have the specifics on the 7. They were likely a combination of tickets or charges. What's important to note here is that while live music and amplified music is permitted, they still have to adhere to the noise bylaw and Chapter 591 with respect to probably the hours of operation as well as the decibel levels.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
So just to wrap that one up, you've got the tenant landlord relationship, but they can on that private property access the main street, the MRRI grant that sounds like a medical procedure. They still have access to that. Perhaps the application is like a medical procedure. They still have that.
So through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. We hope that the procedure isn't as painful as a medical procedure. But yes, that particular establishment is able to access the CaféTO Property Improvement Grant.
Okay. And a lot of my questions did get answered. So it's only 19 restos that we know of that wanted to put in these platforms last year exercise that grant. So out of you're seeing probably a minimum number of 400 stores. The vast majority are still eligible to go after that grant to cover some platform costs. So if we can go back to that, the permit fees again, if you could give me those global numbers, if they're doing the full street side, curbside lane cafe, in it, the fees end up being in the neighborhood of $3,000. What was the smaller charge you mentioned? The all-in fee?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to clarify there. You're right, on the 3,000 was curb lane. The 1,400 was sidewalk. And then there was an $859 fee, which is for applications, but that is for new applications only. Anyone who's already in the program doesn't necessarily have to pay those.
Right. And then the last piece, someone asked this at the last minute when we were talking about this yesterday, what happens to the little ice cream store who has just all along, pre-COVID and all the way through, just put 2 little bistro tables under their window on the sidewalk? What happens to them?
Great question, and I think it's important for the cafes, for the ice cream, for any type of small shop. As of right, in the patios bylaw, you are permitted to have a couple of chairs, a bistro table, a bench, no charge, as of right.
Right, so we're not interfering with that at all in the proposal here today. Okay, and so the last thing that is left is going forward. There is the pilot that now looks at, having gone through the pilot, now we sort of have a list of activities and an MO to go forward with the BIA to create new districts. Have we mapped out what those limitations are? I would think there's a finite number of streets where you could do this without interfering with citywide traffic. So if we got a map of the potential areas now?
I think it's both, through the mayor to Councillor Carroll, I think it's both a combination of where the BIAs and the restaurants want to be participating in that kind of a district. I think there's the need for them to have an interest in it. As of right now, other than when we have an active construction project, we haven't said that there's areas where we're not going to permit cafes as part of the program.
Okay.
I mean, I think that there certainly are lots of active construction projects, and when there are construction projects, we try to work around those who want to have cafes so that both can be accommodated. But we haven't identified streets to say that there will not be cafes permitted on those streets. So really, it's about a partnership with the BIAs to identify those locations where they really think it's going to work for them and their member businesses are interested, and then helping to support that activity.
So that takes me where I was hoping this ends up. So there's no no-go street really that you wouldn't look at yet. So this program could, in its permanent iteration, it becomes a thing that actually could incentivize a group of businesses to be a BIA or to be stronger as a BIA, because we now have this potential. We know that over there on Avenue X, they build their platforms together, they've worked out all the rules together, they've even bought a common storage locker. Shouldn't we do that? So there's no map that in existence that says, there's no point. Our street is a no-go. They're not even going to talk to us. We don't have any constraint like that at this point. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Other questions of staff before we move on to speakers?
Could I permit one more round? I'll be really quick. It's just one question. Sorry. And this is just a technical question. It's for construction. When construction takes place, and now we're charging fees for this space, and not emergency construction, but I mean more permanent closures, is there a fee rebate schedule, or how are we dealing with construction?
The fees are prorated.
All right, assuming that's the end of questions of staff, then we'll move on to speakers. And if I may, I'll take the prerogative of the chair of speaking first, only because I want to put a motion on the table that I hope will see that we're asking staff between now and council to give us some information. So if we could put that up, that would be great. So you can see that the, sorry, let me start the clock here. You can see that the intent of this motion is to ask the different people involved, the General Manager of Transportation Services, the Executive Director of Licensing and Standards, and the General Manager of Economic Development and Culture to report directly to our council meeting upcoming, to provide options that address transition concerns for 2023. And we've heard many of those today, and I've tried here not to give an exhaustive list, but to give general categories, including but not limited to. So in other words, it's an all-inclusive list. Matters such as a grace period for platform installations, amendments to the fee schedule, options that better enable businesses outside of BIAs to fully participate in the program, and options that address large off-street CaféTO permits. So again, that is not an exclusive list. It is just including those things so that other things that aren't mentioned are fully encapsulated within the intent of the motion and are meant to be responsive to all the different things that staff and we have heard today. I'll just say on this program, first of all, thank you to the staff. I mean, transportation services in particular, but I know MLS and economic development have all been involved. They have this incredible myriad of things that they're asked to do for us, from snow plowing to, well, you know, you name it. This program, I think, is a pride and joy of the city. It's certainly of mine, and I think of the councillors involved. And I well remember as it was a lifeline, as we heard today, from the Restaurants Canada people, from John Carew, and from individual deputants. Billy said the same thing, and it was a lifeline. And I think as important as the lifeline and the economic benefits, it also really did change the look and feel of the city, and in a way that I think we could be proud of. And you know, sometimes out of a crisis comes something that is good, and the pandemic was certainly a crisis. But and I will remember, as Councillor Fletcher most certainly will, going down to the Danforth and meeting some unnamed parties there who predicted to me with total certainty, and in fact made me a bet which has still not been paid off. But the bet was just for dinner. The loser would buy dinner. But the prediction was made by a very elevated person in that area that every business on the Danforth would be bankrupt, that there would be tumbleweed rolling down the Danforth. Within a month of this program being implemented, it would be a complete disaster. And of course, I now describe the Danforth as ground zero of the CaféTO program, because if there's one place where you see it, kind of at its best, and there's many, many places where it's terrific, it's there. So that turned out not to be accurate, but that success doesn't mean that we don't have to be very careful in implementing these changes as we go forward. And I think all of us, maybe even reluctantly, the people from the BIAs and from the restaurants would argue that it is not unfair, or would agree it's not unfair for us to begin the process of some degree of cost recovery, or if you don't look at it from the standpoint of cost recovery, some fair charge being made for the private use of public space and where people can make money, which we hope they do. We want them to make money. However, my own research, just when I go around, like a lot of the out and about on the streets, and I go into the restaurants in particular, and I would say virtually without exception, in the smaller restaurants, as opposed to the sort of fancy pants ones downtown, they're doing very well. You can't get a table. But the smaller ones, say, I think the universal average just about is 70%. That's where they're at in terms of their business. We heard slightly different numbers today, but not really far off that mark. And we heard about the margins today, and I think we all know that you cannot really operate a business and get a return on your investment, leave alone pay back some of the debt that might have been incurred during the time of the pandemic at 3%, 2%, kind of return. It's not healthy for the employees. It's not healthy for the owners, obviously. And so I think we have to, this motion is meant to say, fine, the staff in good faith came forward with the proposals they thought were appropriate. There's a degree of, I guess, what I'll call sticker shock on that. Some people who weren't expecting the platform requirement. I said yesterday in some meetings we were having that, if you postpone or put off or never do the platform requirement, you run the risk of having us be criticized as a government that has to show leadership for non-compliance with accessibility things that we're trying to do, not just because the law says we have to very soon, but because we believe it's the right thing to do. Similarly, there would be those who'd say, well, there's a private benefit to this, which we're happy about, but it's coming on public land and public space and all this kind of thing. And then finally, there's the question of cost recovery, where we make an investment which we've been happy to make. It's $20 million over the last couple of years, but going forward, should there be some sharing of that investment that is appropriate as between those who benefit, which include the city. So that's why I talk about sharing. So the purpose of all this is to ask the staff, and I know it's a tall order when they've done all the work already, to go away between now and council and come back, having heard what they heard as we did from the deputations today, and knowing what they know, and give us some options on some things we could do to perhaps implement this in a slightly more moderate way, or however it should be phrased. So those are my comments, and I would commend this motion to you, and we'll go from there in terms of other speakers and other motions there may be. So thank you. Was that a question of the mover, Councillor Carroll, or a desire to speak? Please go ahead. Yeah. Are there any questions of the mover? If not, we can go forward to. Okay.
Well, I actually don't have a motion to move, because your motion, I think, is broad enough that it really encapsulates every concern that I've heard over the week since the agenda became public. But I'm most excited because it leaves some room, although, if we're going to do this, we may end up having to find a funding source, because what we see before us today is, I believe, what's in the 2023 budget proposal for all of the associated divisions. And yet what we're looking at is maybe we're not all the way there yet in 2023, but I think there's room in your motion to look at that. But what it supports that really encourages me is the ability to look at the request that Mr. Carew made on behalf of Tabia and all the BIAs. I'm really heartened by the fact that the cooperation that can happen between the businesses within each of these districts really developed just over this week since the agenda became public and they saw these are the recommendations. We've gone from the first BIA ED that came to see me was, we're not building platforms, we're not doing any of this, this is ridiculous, we'll pay you a fee but not that high and go away, to, okay, if we have to build these platforms, how are we going to do it? To this morning, Mr. Carew is telling us he's already got AutoCAD design guidelines, plus they've begun to work with suppliers who are hearing from all the BIAs. There's a cooperation a spirit of cooperation starting here that I think is the very essence of why BIAs are meant to exist. And so what we're seeing is we can take this on, we can probably take up every dollar in that federal grant, which we always love. Here's a grant, please take it up. And this would do it in this year. It would be horrible to leave those dollars on the table. And so they're talking about doing exactly that, but they do need some relief. And it's possible that the way in which we might provide that leaves us with a model for what happens going forward. If we are going to give this much assistance to the businesses and the BIAs that are willing to do this year, what about the BIA and the avenue that hasn't even started and comes into the game 3 years from now? Perhaps we end up in coming up with some options for Mayor Tory's motion, an option that could also be a go forward and introductory offer to any new avenue that wants to take this up, and all the assistance is now gone. And so I think that extra look between now and council allows them to look at it in that context. What can we do for struggling restaurants now, and what about those that will come later on? I mean, we hope that any door that has closed down, as Restaurant Canada talked to us about, there's some restaurant coming in post-recovery days to open their doors there. And so we want to be able to look at that. And so I think it's important to look at the motion that way. And lastly, I just want to say that it was really important for me to ask that question about what about those just two little wiry bistro tables out front of, the tiny coffee shop that's off the beaten track. And there are lots of those in the East End. There are lots of those in the suburbs. And people are saying, ooh, this sounds really complicated. What if I just want to sit down on a bench with my ice cream cone right outside the front door of this shop? That's still possible, and that's part of street vitality too. This just allows us to take it supernova, as we have done. And I've been the first to take advantage of that. The halo effect to me comes down to me as a car driver down to this. I see the patios and I decide, I think I'll get out of my car and go to one of these restaurants. Surely one of them will have a chair for me. And we know one thing about shoppers that arrive in cars. Once you're out of the car, you don't go back in the car until you've gone to every shop you've been driving by for the last year and wondered about, and now you're going to go to all of them before you get back in the car. And that's why Danforth didn't, end up with tumbleweeds. That was the net effect, not just of the locals and the people getting off subways, but it actually dragged us out of our cars. And once out, we did the whole avenue. Those are my comments. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. And before we go to Councillor Fletcher, I neglected to have our visiting councillor speak first. I should just tell you how it gladdens my heart to hear you as only a former budget chair, current budget chair, or mayor could do to acknowledge that any cost that we incur in giving up fees will have to come from somewhere. But having said that, we'll cross that bridge. Councillor Fletcher to speak.
Thank you. Oh. Something going on there? Oh. Okay, great, thanks. Just to I think it's the system.
Yeah, I think it is. I will just hope it doesn't happen again. It's been pretty good. Yeah. I don't think it's your mic, but we can try.
We'll try this
Seems
one.
to be okay at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I do have
Start your
30
time again.
seconds used up. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you so much. And just a few really quick thank yous and to you, Mr. Mayor, for your motion. I think it's really great that we're getting the space to be able to respond to all the things that we've heard today and since the report came out. And also for coming out to the Danforth. You recall when we drove the last spike in order to set up the cafes. It was great. And we didn't see any tumbleweeds then, and there still are no tumbleweeds now. So your support for small business during the pandemic and after is really such an important thing. And just to all the divisions that have worked hard in getting this program up and going, don't take it personally that we're saying we have to look at this again, but I can imagine how frustrating it was to see them not used, really and truly, because I was frustrated. So let's try to have a smooth, great program. And whereas Mr. Crew, I think he may have gone, but the role of Tabia, and there he is, the role of Tabia in these kinds of things and getting to a smooth place is so important, and support for BIAs and the economy. And Restaurant Canada, for your information about the recovery and restaurants, is really critical here. And then my BIAs, 4 of whom have already written in, so they're very active, they love this program, and they love it because it's good for business, but it also is good for all businesses, as we've talked about, with that halo effect. I want to say that, first and foremost, I think this is really, we have to look at everything with that economic development lens. And I know it's about transportation and putting in the blocks and everything else, but this was a huge program to assist businesses, assist BIAs. And first and foremost, that needs to be our lens. And that is, and sometimes we're getting lost in other things. So I just want to say economic development, this is a really critical program, as we've heard from Tabia, as we've heard from Restaurants Canada, and just understanding the nature of the restaurant business now. I know we all kind of feel like we're out of the pandemic, but so many businesses don't feel like they're out of the pandemic, and we don't want closed restaurants. We also don't want, as I think Restaurants Canada said, 60% say, well, if it's going to be exactly that, I might not be able to participate, which would be a tremendous drop. I can't imagine the Danforth without the vibrancy that we've created with this program, as well as Queen Street and Little India. And the public realm enhancement, that, to me, that's number 2. There's nothing like Destination Danforth, and Councillor Bradford and I are so honored and privileged to have Destination Danforth, and thank you so much to Barbara Gray and your great team in imagining the Danforth in a different way, with the bike lanes, with enhancements, with some murals, with colors. It's just not a boring old street. And then adding the cafes with lights and things. At night, it's a spectacular place to be. And I think that's one of our goals of our city when we said we're taking out traffic that speeds every day. We're going to put in a bike lane. We're going to make it look nice. And then we're going to have these beautiful cafes. And people come out, and I believe you, Councillor Carroll, because I'm the same way. Once I get out, I'm going to have a look at everything around that cafe and quite possibly buy a lot. So those are really, all of those things are important, as well as AODA. I'm not sure that through economic development, I would just ask that through the BIAs that they come to understand those city requirements a little bit better. Now, many of these are restaurants where you can't actually use the washroom. In the old city of Toronto, you've been there on Yonge Street and everywhere else, those washrooms are in the basement on the steepest set of stairs you have ever seen in your life. So there's a factor here where I think we have to be a little flexible, because you're not able actually to have the restaurant itself accessible. So somehow we do have to have accessibility for everybody there. And lastly, for the fees, I think that reasonable fees, entrance fee, pay as you play, or use it or lose it fee, because the list that you sent, Ms. Callan, thank you for sending that. I know of a few others that we call ghost hotels, where there's not really anybody living there, Airbnb, but we have ghost patios where I go by all the time, and really there's no activity. So I can understand the frustrations of other businesses. If there's no activity, what's it doing there? And you didn't even have to pay for it. So if you want to pay for it and you have to do a few things, you will use that. And what will end up will be a truly permanent program, because it's not a permanent program, because when it's free, oh yeah, I'd like to do that, and you didn't do that. So that will be able to be supported through ECDEV, through transportation, and through MLS. And I just want to say we need to remain flexible and creative. That brought us this program. It will maintain and continue the success of our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Now we can revert back to members of the committee who wish to speak. Do I see hands up anywhere? Going once, going twice? Okay, well, if not, then we can, I think we just have the one motion here, and we can proceed to deal with that if there's no other comments. And so I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Councillor Morley was just on her way back to her office but didn't make it in time, so that's fine. I'm sure she'll take due note of what we've done here. And so I thank you all for that item now. Are we in a position to revert back to the advisory committee matter? Okay. So going back to that, which I think was item 2.1, we had, I think, some motions we were expecting. I think we got to speakers. I think, is that as far as we got? I think we finished questions of staff on that matter, and we were at speakers, and we stopped because there were people that wanted to speak that had motions that weren't ready. Is that where we were? All right, then I'll call for speakers on the item 2.1, the advisory committee reestablishment. Oh, there he is. Okay. Now, I want you to know, Councillor Ainsley, I took due note earlier on of the coffee cup you were flashing around that says on it, dad, husband, and legend. I understood the dad and the husband part. The legend part I couldn't figure out, but perhaps you'll explain that another time. You can issue a press release. Okay, over to you, sir.
The legend part came from my father-in-law.
Ah, okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. I do have a motion to move on this item, that City Council amend the terms of reference for the Film, Television, and Digital Media Advisory Board and the Toronto Music Advisory Committee by increasing the composition to include one member of council designated the night economy champion by the mayor. I am the designated night economy champion, so the motion is a little bit self-serving, but I think this is an important role on both of these boards, both for myself and anybody that becomes the future night economy champion for the city of Toronto. I think as we're coming out of COVID, hopefully, it's very important to make sure that voices are heard on both of these boards. They do comprise the different components of our night economy. So I'm putting this forward, and I hope I can have everybody's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. I have, if no one else, that's just a question of the mover, just to clarify something I know is the case because we've talked about this. That is not to the exclusion of anyone else. In other words, it's adding a member that is the night economy designate, correct, Councillor Ainsley?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
That is correct.
Just so that anybody else was interested, it's not going to subtract from other members who are already there or other people that are on that committee by virtue of their position. Okay, Councillor Ainsley had no other comments. We're still on speakers and anybody with motions. So we have Councillor Chang.
Thank you, Mayor, and I have a motion to move the City Council amend the terms of reference for the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Two-Spirit, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer to SLGBTQ+ Advisory Committee, such as that 2 members will be youth members between the ages of 18 and 29, and 2 members will be elder members who self-identify and represent the wisdom of their communities. And I'm just modeling these requirements off of what we have for the Anti-Black Racism Advisory. I think it's very important that we are very intentional of including voices that are often unheard and unrepresented. And I've heard that there are challenges sometimes in terms of recruitment, but this initiative to have these voices and this opportunity to listen means that we should meet people where they're at. So if people can't make daytime meetings, we have to make sure that there are evening meetings available, especially if we want that broader cross-section. So the reason I'm making this motion is just that we really want to work hard to have a cross-section of voices heard, especially young people who often feel that the future is not there. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chang. Any questions of the mover? Okay. Others wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, well then I think we can call the question on the 2 motions. We have that one, and then did I take that one already?
You haven't placed your motion.
Beg your pardon?
You haven't placed your motion. You need to place yours.
No, it was Councillor Ainsley that I didn't. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, this was your motion.
Oh, I didn't. You're absolutely right. Yes, I'm sorry. I wrote it so long ago I forgot, and I made mention, I will just take time, 1 second, that I would ask the staff to offer an opportunity to members of the Indigenous communities at large, as it were. This is pursuant to some of the representations we heard this morning, that the terms of reference of the governance review included past members of the committee, but didn't specifically explicitly include other members of the community, and that the staff be requested to offer an opportunity to offer their input to members of the community at large, and they'll figure out how best to do that, because it's a large community, but they can do that. So this motion's up there now. So there are the three yes then, three motions. So I have 1, 2, 3. There we go. So motion number 1. Are there any questions about that? I don't think so. We discussed that earlier. Motion number 1 is from Councillor Ainsley to do with the addition of one member of council designated the Night Economy Champion. And if there's no other questions or comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion number 2 is the motion from Councillor Cheng concerning the terms of reference of the LGBTQ to us plus committee rather. And I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And motion number 3 is the one I put concerning the input from the Indigenous communities for the governance review of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Yes. Thank you. We go next to item 2.5, and that is the item that is concerning the ensuring transparency in the 2022 election, amending the contribution rebate program. And that was, I believe, held down by you, Councillor Pasternak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and did you have some questions for staff?
There are no deputations on that, so we can go straight to questions of staff.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, now really what we're looking at is two things here. One is transparency in an election campaign, particularly election finances, and the other component is a technical linkage between the submission of election receipts and invoices and participation of the candidate in the contribution rebate program. So on the first part, transparency, can we say that everyone who spends $10,000 or more must submit an audited financial report to the clerk's office?
Through the mayor, that is correct. Currently, the contribution rebate program, with the amendment that we made in 2021, removed the requirement. Sorry, I'm going to start over. The Municipal Elections Act requires an audited financial statement for anyone that raises or spends more than $10,000. If you are participating in the contribution rebate program, you're required to submit an audited financial statement no matter what you raise or spend.
Okay, and I'm trying to zero in on the transparency item now. Now, these auditors' reports are public documents. They get posted on the City of Toronto website. Any member of the public can review them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, when a candidate auditor's report is received, does the clerk send those out or have them reviewed by a third-party auditor to make sure there's no apparent violation of the Municipal Elections Act, or does it simply just go on to the website?
The auditor's reports would be posted without a review unless there is a compliance audit directed.
Okay, so so there's no third party that the clerk's office or Toronto Elections retains to take a look at these audited reports when they come in?
Not the audited reports.
Are all the donations, every single donation, listed on these audited reports?
Through the mayor, I'm not sure. I'd need to double check that in terms of what detail the audited reports would include.
Right. So it was a requirement in past elections to submit all your receipts, and that meant photocopying dozens and dozens of pages of receipts. In, I guess, 2018, we had 501 candidates and 372 candidates in 2022. What happened once that pile of receipts were submitted to Toronto Elections or the clerk's office? What happened to them after that? Did they sit in a filing cabinet? Were they scanned online? What was the role of these receipts?
Through the mayor, so when we received the receipts for expenses, although we encourage candidates to do their own review and redact any private personal identifying information before they submit to us, my staff do a review for redaction purposes to make sure we're not putting anything that is private information in the public realm. We do not scan and post them electronically, so they are kept at our office on the main floor of City Hall and available for public inspection upon request.
So those receipts under the in the 2022 by-election are no longer required. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, so for the 2022 general election, council had passed a report in the fall of 21 removing the requirement for expense receipts for people participating in the contribution rebate program.
Right. Now we're past the election period, and I understand that candidates are working on their audited financial statements, including me. How many candidates have already submitted their financial statements to Toronto Elections or the clerk's office?
Through the mayor, we've had approximately 100 candidates file their financial statements to date.
So what would it take? So these people have not been required to give photocopies of all the receipts. What kind of resources would have to be allocated to try and go after these 100 and get their receipts? I mean, what do we do now? Because this motion is requesting that receipts be required with submission.
Final question.
Through the mayor, I'm not sure what the breakdown is of out of the 100 that have filed so far, how many have identified that they've opted into the contribution rebate program. I believe it would be a fairly small number, so we would need to notify them as soon as possible of the change to the reporting requirements and ensure that their receipts were submitted quickly. I will also note that the Municipal Elections Act does require all candidates to keep their expense receipts until the next election, so they should actually have them within their own records.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. And questions of staff? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. And I don't think I'm putting Fiona on the spot because you've been doing this, I think, for a couple of elections now. So in 2018, if I filed my return and I put down there $6,000 for food, that you'd have the receipts, and if someone said that's a lot of money for food, you could come and look up how I spent it, whether I spent it $100 a day or I just took everybody out for dinner 3 nights before the election and spent $5,000 on all in one go. You'd have the receipts for that, and they're FOI-able. Am I right about that in 2018?
Through the mayor, that's correct. Someone could come into our office and look up that information in terms of the expense receipts.
Okay, and in 2022, I put down $6,000 for food, but I don't give you the receipts. Someone can't walk into the office and say, that's a lot of money. Where'd that come from? They would have to ask for an entire audit and probably hire themselves a lawyer, as some of the people who pursue us do. Would they not? They wouldn't be able to find out how I spent the $6,000 on food.
Through the mayor, the expense receipts would not be available with that level of breakdown for them to review.
And not FOI-able. All they could do is take me to court in a compliance audit.
They could submit a compliance audit application form that would be considered by the Compliance Audit Committee.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, questions?
Thank you. I was just in the hall telling everybody what a great thing CaféTO is. Just a couple of questions. So just this accountability and finances at the other elections, sorry, Lily, I can't see. There's Elections Ontario, and they're political parties, and they all have to comply with certain rules. And if you make a big boo-boo, now your whole political party would be in trouble. Would I have that right?
Through the mayor, I'm not, I don't understand the detailed financial candidate campaign finances for the provincial government, so I'm not comfortable responding to that.
But it is a provincial party system, not an individual candidate system.
Through the mayor, that's correct.
Right. And when we talked about this earlier, there seemed to be a misconception that somehow when you go to an auditor for these statements, that the auditor would catch if there's a discrepancy. Are you aware the auditor's not actually allowed to do that? Once you've hired the auditor, that's kind of like your lawyer, even if they find one.
Through the mayor, that yes, I'm aware of that, Councillor.
Yeah, so taking that out, there is actually very little accountability. And it's not used very often, but you can check things when receipts are turned in. Would you agree with that?
Through the mayor, I would agree with that. I have certainly seen members of the public look at our expense receipts.
And just check if it seems reasonable or not reasonable. Before you would go to a compliance audit, there would have to be something that would be kind of major. It's not $15 or something of that nature. The compliance audit committee wouldn't be worth your while to do that.
Any elector is free to submit a compliance audit application where they feel that campaign finance rules have not been followed, and the compliance audit committee needs to consider it. So I think there's a range of applications that get submitted and considered by that committee.
But how would you know to file at the compliance audit committee because you don't have access to any documents?
Through the mayor, I mean, I think that electors rely on a range of information. Some compliance audit committee applications have considered expense receipts and others have not. So I think, again, there's a range of information that leads one to potentially submit an application.
But being able to see if your thoughts are justified by looking at receipts is kind of I guess I don't know if anybody from legal is here, but there's some kind of natural justice principle there that I think we're missing out on.
Well, I'm here from legal.
Oh, hi,
yeah,
Ward.
hi there. Yes, hi there. But I think the
Best practice.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I guess, I don't have a lot of experience with compliance audit, but I guess I was on the assumption they had sources of information. They weren't just relying on the city. So I don't think fundamental justice is where I would go with that.
Well, you would rely on the city who holds that because there's no other way to find anything out. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I would, because I don't think that's the experience. But.
Your experience? Or the experience of the Compliance Audit Committee?
My limited awareness of...
Okay, you're not that aware. Okay, but just having that information. So I guess I'll leave it, I'll speak to it, but I have my auditor is very clear, not surprising, that they would not want to feel that they were the ones who had to say, oh, you have a problem here, you have to do it or change it, that they have no ability to flag a big issue in my expenses. I just want to clarify that completely. That this, as a CPA, they don't have that legal ability.
Through the mayor, again, I've never been a candidate, so I can't speak to what an auditor sort of candidate relationship would be, but I do agree with you, Councillor, that the CPA guidelines would not enable an auditor to require you to disclose any errors, although I do believe an auditor could certainly point that out confidentially to you as their client.
Thank you.
I'll finish then. Thank you. Thanks very much. May I just have a motion to extend? We can put it up, I think, shortly, just because we just have this item and then one item left with one deputant, and I think we can get through in fairly short order. There it is, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right. Then we had other questions of staff on this matter. Any others? Okay. Then we're ready to go to speakers. I'll turn first to you, Councillor Fletcher, if you...
Yes, this was my motion to council, and particularly brought by my auditor, who was quite surprised that this change had happened. And I do believe that the staff thought that perhaps the auditor would catch things. I have actually had an experience, my auditor's had an experience where he turned a candidate down and said, I'm sorry, I can't do your audit because he's found things there. They went off and found an auditor that would comply with that. So I don't want to make a big deal of it, but it was just a level of accountability for candidates because we don't have a party system here. There's no political party that's going to be investigated by Elections Ontario or by our staff. A very different situation than provincially. So the system that we'd set up was checks and balances were very evident to me. And this either could mean everybody will be asked for a compliance audit because actually have no idea what's there, or just people will make a decision that something looks right, something looks wrong. I will just give you one example that we have to live by because the MEA is very prescriptive and it has to do with rents. And when this first got brought in, there was a certain piece of just rents, how expensive they are downtown compared to, I know you had a great big former car dealership and I had a little wee broom closet and yours was cheaper than mine. So the tendency will, and we have very strict spending limits. So I think just this is a good oversight. It was a great system. I'm not sure the staff meant to remove that in that way. It was not actually a recommendation. It was in the report. It was not a real recommendation. I'm finding that more and more, Mr. Mayor, that there's things written in reports that aren't recommendations that end up somehow being implemented. And I think, I'm just going to say, I think we just have to be more careful, saying that to you, suggesting that to the city manager. It's happened in our discussion around the changes in the Planning Act, where it wasn't a recommendation, but it's in the report, so now it's the law. And I am finding that to be a bit difficult, but on this one, I just think we should just continue with the standard practice that we've had for many years and have the accountability that we've had for many years. That was why I made that motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fletcher. Others to speak? Councillor Pasternak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a motion, and it was a bit of a compromise to adopt what Councillor Fletcher, and I believe, Councillor Moynihan, you were the seconder on this item, to make it for future elections, to reinstate the receipts and invoices policy for future elections and by-elections. And the reason it has to be for future elections is, as you've heard in the questioning, over 100 candidates, or about 100 candidates, have already filed their financial statements under the current rules, which does not require the receipts and invoices. While I never really minded submitting receipts and invoices, I've got to tell you, it was quite the task to photocopy dozens of pages of receipts, redacting personal information, banking information, making sure there was no identity theft or fraud, violating people's privacy. There are so many messy aspects to the photocopying of election receipts that it really was getting into a legal quagmire. When it comes to what is public, it's important to remember that the financial statements that we are required to submit have about 70 line items of expenses that are gone through an audit that the candidate has obviously paid for. And I can say I've done 5 elections, and all the accountants and auditors have provided me with advice to make sure that they were completely accurate and honest reflections of the expenses of the campaign. The 2 spending limits, expenses subject to the spending limit, is listed. It's a public document. Expenses subject to spending limit for parties and other expressions of appreciation, that's also listed as a public with the other 60, 65 or so, 68 line items, you can see line by line what the candidate has spent. So when it comes to transparency, I think the system we have for this election is adequate. But looking to the future, I think we have to make sure we're not violating any privacy laws, and going forward to make sure that these review of expenses are honest and sincere, to make fair elections, and not, it's very hard to stop the political vendettas or the paybacks or the grudges or the sore losers who usually look through an opponent's, winning opponent's campaign finances and try and get it before the Compliance Audit Committee. For new councillors, a cautionary tale: the Compliance Audit Committee will take an applicant who feels you have violated the Municipal Elections Act. It's often advisable to hire a lawyer. My understanding is that lawyer costs around $15,000 for a 10-minute hearing, and it makes it into the papers. It's a very biased, unfair process for candidates who've, to the best of their knowledge and with the help of a chartered accountant, have provided the most honest and thoughtful financial statements possible. And of course, these are all viewable for the public. So I'll leave it at that. It's a compromise to put back the receipt requirement, but it's just too late for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Others wishing to speak? Councillor Carroll.
Just briefly, I'll support Councillor Pasternak's motion, because I didn't realize how many people had filed, but then I discovered that I'm one of them. so there are a number of things that are already in now. I don't do the photocopying of the receipt, so I don't know how arduous the task is. But it does very much pain me that those who like to go through returns and figure out where they can do a compliance audit, and there are a couple of people in town who make a career out of it, it does worry me that without that facility to come in and look at receipts, they don't have the ability to screen and say, there's no there. I'm not going after this candidate. And it isn't always the winner. We've had some kind of high-profile cases where it's been a candidate who was not successful, and yet their behaviors during the campaign were such that those who just go after election accountability have gone after unsuccessful candidates, looking for the highest bar to be set in the largest city in the country, that we are able to have highly accountable elections in the municipal level. And for them to be able to come in and actually look before taking what is a huge step, which is, never mind the impact on the candidate, a compliance audit has a huge impact on city staff. And that concerns me more, because if you had a spate of them in one election year, you can end up tying up those in elections, in our elections division for most of the term, and then it's time to prepare for the next. But I do appreciate what we've heard about the challenges around making it retroactive at this point, but happy to comply going forward, because it hasn't been a problem in the past. But I will say this, Councillor Pasternak and I do share one thing in common. We continue to say, especially now that we have these campaigns with fewer candidates, there is an even more accountable type of election going on in some cities, the biggest example being New York City, where campaign finance audits happen before election night. Every candidate has the chance to be advised by a campaign finance authority. You're not quite in compliance here. You've got X number of days to clean it up, so that everyone is in compliance by election night. And then you have a different form of financing, rebate financing, as opposed to, or grant financing as opposed to rebates, I should say, that is the most accountable of them all. I think that's the gold standard to me, is that voters be able to know who's in compliance before they actually walk into the poll. And that's a conversation for another day, but this at least gives us, in the regime we have today, the highest level of accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Are there others wishing to speak? Well, if not, then we have a motion from Councillor Pasternak, which we can put up. There it is, and it's an amendment to recommendation 1, and you can see it there, and I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor, we didn't, carried. You're okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that then brings us to, I'm sorry, item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, that brings us then to item 2.6, which is a very diligent report filed by Councillor Ainsley, as he does when he goes on different representation on boards and so forth, and it has attracted the attention of a deputy, Derek Moran. You know the rules. You have 5 minutes. There may be some questions.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent, expressed or implied, in doing so is fraud. God bless His Majesty the King. Long live His Majesty the King. Let the record show that I do not consent to the warrantless searches taking place downstairs here at Toronto City Hall. Let the record also show that it's been 2 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days since Jim Hart left the Toronto Police Services Board, and public appointments has still not replaced him, and in doing so is not in compliance with Section 27 of the Police Services Act. So in this report it says, addressing the increased harassment of elected officials, this panel discussion sought to focus on the serious problem and how to combat the increase of abuse and threatening behavior, which represents a threat to all orders of government and civil society. As a result of attending the latest Toronto Police Services Board meeting this past Thursday, I believe I have discovered a plausible explanation with regards to the increase in the mentioned harassment, abuse, and threatening behavior from the public. This is due to the candor of the Vice Chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, Councillor Francis Nunziata, who made the stunning admission speaking directly in front of new Toronto Police Chief Myron Demke that...
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Nunziata is not here to defend herself. I don't think deputants should be besmirching.
Well, whether it's on topic or not, we can't figure out quite yet. Maybe we're getting to that. But I'll just let him quote. You know, he was about to quote Councillor Nunziata, and so whatever she said, she said if he quotes her accurately. So we'll just see how this goes.
Time's been running for like...
Please go ahead, Derek.
Who made the stunning admission speaking directly in front of new Toronto Police Chief Myron Demke that they would never be able to get away with it at City Hall. They would be thrown out. What I inferred from what Councillor Nunziata was implying is that it's become a regular practice here at Toronto City Hall that when members of the public who come here to exercise their right to freedom of expression, which Councillor Pasternak ironically tried to violate, by speaking at these various meetings, end up criticizing staff or a councillor too harshly with what they had to say, or express themselves by making a comment that someone is stealing a paycheck because someone here isn't doing their job, that they are dealt with by having security called on them, who then proceed to essentially assault that member of the public by forcibly removing them from the room, and I assume then from City Hall entirely. Councillor Carroll once told me when I bumped into her at the Canada Square movie theaters a few years ago that there are a lot of good people here at the City of Toronto, but that they are too afraid to speak out and do the right thing. Councillor Carroll explained to me that this is known around here as the Webster effect. That's why I want to thank Councillor Nunziata for the courage she showed in speaking out at last week's police board meeting, as I'm sure this was a daunting decision for her to speak freely before she said it. As Councillor Carroll also told me at the Canada Square movie theaters that she had been subjected to harassment while a member of the Toronto Police Services Board. But as the end of the real oath of office Councillor Nunziata took being a member of the police board says, "So help me God." And as God says in John 8:32, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So I have an actual deputation to make. I appoint new Toronto Police Chief Myron Demke to act as the trustee for me in this matter and respectfully direct him to investigate the alleged assaults taking place here at Toronto City Hall upon members of the public for simply exercising their right to freedom of expression because someone here thought they spoke too harshly in their criticism of staff or a councillor. In Bracken versus Fort Erie 2017, the Court of Appeal for Ontario said, "A protest does not cease to be peaceful simply because protesters are loud and angry. Political protesters can be subject to restrictions to prevent them from disrupting others, but they are not required to limit their upset in order to engage their constitutional right to engage in protest. In a free and democratic society, citizens are not to be handcuffed and removed from public space traditionally used for the expression of dissent because of the discomfort their protest causes." And from this same case, they also mentioned that no doubt they did not like being called liars and communists, but the Court of Appeal implied that's also part of freedom of expression. And you've heard me read that case at the police board before, Mayor Tory. And I object to what Councillor Pasternak tried to do in violating my freedom of expression.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of the deputant? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today, and I believe that completes our business for today, unless there's any...
I'll move receipt of the item, Mayor.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. I move receipt of the item, and that's all those in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you. And that does complete our business, and we'll thank you all very much, and see you next time. Well, but you know what? I figured that I